My dad has always been too nice of a guy, like a pushover. I'll just start the story with that. I don't say it for no reason. We live in uptown Chicago. We don't have a huge family, so our Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings are always small, like less than 6 people. This was Thanksgiving night of last year, 2019. Dinner was almost done already. My dad was picking up some last-minute foods like stuffing and cranberry sauce at the corner store since we didn't have any. My mom and I started setting the table, while my brother and grandparents sat at the table. My dad finally returned, but with more than just stuffing and cranberry sauce though. He brought someone along with him. It was this middle-aged, dirty-looking man in a green puffer jacket and black pants. He looked homeless. My dad introduced the man as Stefan, and said he would be joining us for dinner tonight. My brother and I exchanged surprised, uncomfortable looks. Then my mom and I did the same. As my dad started preparing the stuffing, he was telling us how he met Stefan alone in the cold streets, and said we as a Christian family should do the right thing and invite him into dinner, as no one should be alone on Thanksgiving. My grandma invited the man to sit with us. I could tell my mom wasn't comfortable with this as she whispered stuff in my dad's ear. Too late now though, the man was already seated at the table. Good thing I didn't sit next to him because I could smell his clothes from across the table. I didn't understand what my dad was thinking with this. When all the food was finally on the table, everyone sat down and we did our prayer. My brother and grandma attempted to hold hands with Stefan, but he didn't grab their hands back. I low-key watched him as we all prayed, and he just sat there, his eyes bulgingly wide, his mouth not moving. He just sat there like he didn't want to be there. After the prayer, we all began to eat, and at least 3 of my family members tried talking to him at some point. He didn't seem friendly at all though. His responses were very dry and one-wordish. It made the dinner a little uncomfortable. I didn't know what my dad saw in this man or why he felt comfortable bringing him into our home. I get trying to help the needy, but there was another way to do it than this. He helped himself to some food, but even the way he ate was really messy. Like his fingers were really greasy, some food got in his hair. It wasn't pleasant to watch. Now you may think I'm just trash-talking a homeless person, so let's move past that. Eventually Stefan said, "Excuse me, I gotta go to the bathroom." My dad pointed him in the direction of the bathroom, which was down the half flight of stairs down the hall to the left. He got up, not saying thank you, and followed the directions. Once we were sure he was out of earshot, my mom and grandparents started asking questions like what the hell is wrong with my dad bringing that man in here? My dad whispered that he felt terrible and wanted to do something right. My mom questioned how we were going to get him out of here now. My dad insisted that we were being good people though, and that we'd agree eventually. We continued eating, till my brother asked, "Where is he? He's been gone a while." We all agreed it was strange, so my dad went down the stairs to the bathroom to look. He came back up a few seconds later saying he wasn't in the bathroom. My grandma's looked very distressed as my grandpa started cursing in Italian. My brother, my dad, and I started checking the whole apartment. My dad was calling Stefan's name the whole time. We checked all the bedrooms, all the closets. Somehow he wasn't anywhere. However, the window in my parents' room was open, enough for someone to climb through, so we assumed the obvious. My mom came in yelling at my dad that this is what happens for him being stupid and letting a potentially dangerous person into our home. We all had to agree, sadly. My dad closed the window, and we tried to go about the rest of our dinner normally. But of course, the whole time we talked about the bizarre encounter. After dinner, we had dessert. Then eventually my grandparents left. The 4 of us cleaned up the table and dishes, and a couple hours later, everyone dispersed to their rooms for bed. I'm being very loose with the time frame because this was almost a year ago, but I believe it was another hour later that I finally turned off my TV for bed. The silence in the room allowed me to hear it. The breathing. I heard it in my room, not my breathing. I was frozen stiff. I didn't even want to move or sit up. I didn't know where exactly in the room it was coming from. I just looked for the door to my room, trying to sum up the courage to run. I heard the faintest shuffling sounds, like of the fabric of a jacket, and I heard, almost in my ear, "Shh!" and a hand pressed down on my neck. That's when the scream I'd been building up exploded out of my mouth as I literally sprang out from the bed and into the hall calling for my dad. Everyone came out from their rooms and looked down the hall toward my room when I said Stefan's in there. Shockingly, Stefan stepped out from my room, looked at us, and walked out the front door as my dad yelled at him to get out. Of course, without getting physical because he's a big softie. Stefan was long gone by the time police finally showed up. The police said the important thing was that he left and none of us were hurt, and now just to make sure to lock the door and windows. They took our description of Stefan and they left. I like to think my dad learned his lesson from that. You can't trust everyone you meet. For Black Friday a few years ago, I went to Best Buy. Well, technically it was midnight the night before Black Friday. My local Best Buy is always open late the night before Black Friday. I went with my best friend Taylor to look for a new laptop and maybe whatever other stuff caught my eye. We split off to look for our own things. While browsing the laptop section, someone in a blue Best Buy shirt approached me asking if I needed help. I gave him specific specs I was interested in, and he started looking around with me. He showed me one laptop he claimed he really liked, then asked me what it was I'd be doing with the laptop. I found it to be a slightly odd question, but maybe it was part of his sales pitch. I said just for school and general web browsing kind of deal. After this point though, he seemed more interested in me rather than helping me. Like he was asking a bunch of personal questions like where I'm from, where I go to school, etc. I don't want to sound self-absorbed, but I do get a decent amount of male attraction when I go out. Anyway, I started realizing he seemed to be hitting on me, and I found him overall creepy, so I reminded him politely about the laptop and that I was in a hurry. He was relentless though. He actually asked for my phone number after that. I made it clear to him I was uninterested. Luckily, I locked eyes with Taylor, who happened to be walking over, and I mouthed the word help to her. She understood, and she came over and called my name, saying, "Come in, hurry." I said, "Sorry, I have to go," to the creepy guy, and followed Taylor away. We walked to the other side of the store. I told her I didn't want to see that guy again. He was obsessive and creepy and didn't get the hint. We left the store after that with plans of going shopping elsewhere tomorrow. We were both starving though, so we went to the nearby diner, which is open 24/7. We sat at a booth and looked at the menu. The place was practically empty at this hour, except for a lone man sitting at the bar, seemingly looking at the menu as well. His back was to me. I didn't notice him there 5 minutes earlier. He was in a gray jacket, but I recognized his hair. I whispered to Taylor to look at him. As we looked at him, he tried to subtly turn to look at us, but when he realized we were already staring, he looked away. It was him, the Best Buy worker. "Oh my God, he followed us," I whispered. "Let's go," I said, and we got up and left the diner. We hurried to my car, and I drove us home to my house as fast as I could. Taylor was sleeping over that night. To put it short, eventually there were 3 slow knocks on the living room window. We both shrieked and didn't know what to do. "My apartment is on the bottom floor. It's him," we kept saying. We went to the window, but oddly couldn't see outside, like total blackness. The view of outside was blocked. We were too creeped out. We had to call the cops. When we got a knock on the door from police, we immediately felt safer. So it turned out the reason we couldn't see out the window is because a shirt was hung over the window, blocking view in or outside. Not just any shirt, a blue Best Buy shirt. Pinned to the shirt was a post-it note that said, "I don't work at Best Buy, bitch." So the police recommended I file a harassment charge, but the problem was I didn't know his name or who it was. They said I could get a lawyer and get the surveillance footage from Best Buy to find the guy, but it sounded like a lot of work. I let it go, but I stayed at Taylor's apartment for a few days. I still can't believe that guy followed us all the way to my house. Some people are dangerously crazy. A long time ago, I very briefly lived with my good friend Ben on a quiet street in Northville, Michigan, perhaps notable for being close to Detroit. It wasn't the nicest house, or block, or area for that matter, but the price was unbeatable for two broke young men like ourselves. Ben and I went way back to when we were like 9 years old, and at the time of this story, we worked the same job, and rooming together with him seemed like a great idea. On our first day there, we quickly figured out that the creepy-looking house across the street with the overgrown grass and bushes was abandoned, as were a lot of the houses around the area. In fact, something we somehow hadn't noticed before, there was even graffiti next to one of the front windows and on the fence. Our neighbors on one side seemed like creeps, and we didn't even want to approach them. The neighbor on the other side was an older dude, a very interesting, hippie-ish kind of guy. His name was Marv. He had long gray hair with a matching long gray beard. He seemed friendly at first, I guess, but also very weird and hard to talk to. We spoke with him on our second day there after work. He told us the place had been abandoned for as long as he could remember. That night, with the sun almost set, while we were sitting on the front stoop smoking, I looked to the house across the street and felt a little tingle in my stomach out of shock. I stood up, threw my cigarette onto the floor and crushed it. Ben looked at me confused, and I pointed to the window across the street. I was pointing at a face, which I saw staring at me through the lone upstairs window of the house. "Do you see that? There's someone at that window." Ben looks at the window immediately, but I saw the person move their head away before he could see it. It's weird. I explained to Ben that I didn't even know if it was a male or female, old or young. The glass was just too foggy. All I knew was that I saw the eyes, and they were staring at us. Ben told me I was legitimately creeping him out. He believed me. We ran over to Marv's house to tell him, but strangely he didn't answer his door, even though we saw him watching TV in his tiny, messy living room through the window. The fact that the guy wouldn't answer creeped us out even more. Dude, what the fuck is going on with this place? Ben laughed, but the situation couldn't stay comical for long. Ben owned a katana. He brought it to mention and suggested we go across the street with it, break into the house from the backyard, and see what was going on. We were always adventurous, daring troublemakers as kids, so this was our natural response to the situation. When it got dark, we went across the street to the backyard, broke off the board holding the back door shut, and entered the house. We both had heavy-duty flashlights with us to light up basically any room we were in. The house was dusty, decrepit, but surprisingly seemed to remain untouched from the inside. No graffiti or signs of vandalism anywhere. Still, the place was disturbingly creepy, and we immediately joked that we should get the fuck out of there, but we pressed on. The first floor was pathetically small like our own, a kitchen, a tiny living room, and a dining room. There was no basement and one closet. The first floor was clear. We both agreed to check the upstairs. We tiptoed over to the stairs, and Ben, out of nowhere, screamed, "Is anybody up there?" "Dude, why the fuck would you do that?" I said quietly. Then we both froze in fear when we heard rapid stomping suddenly appear from above us. It was someone heavy, and it sounded like they were running over to the stairway. I literally felt like my heart stopped. Ben, the one with the katana, was the first to flee, grabbing my arm and tugging me with him. We went out the way we entered and ran back to the house, where we saw Marv just standing by his window, watching us. We didn't know what to do. He just intently stared at us as we froze to catch our breath in front of the house. We went inside, decided not to call the police, and moved out literally the next day. We explained to the landlord that the location was just too inconvenient for us, and we needed to leave ASAP. We drove away from that house and never looked back. Alright, so there are a couple of abandoned dorms on my college campus. They were shut down like 15 years ago because of... Actually, I don't really know why. Anyway, they're abandoned. It's rumored that they'll be renovated at some point, but that'll probably never happen. Naturally, it's also rumored that they're haunted. The school has the windows boarded up to prevent students from going in there. Because I fancy myself an urban explorer who isn't afraid of getting into any trouble, I decided about a week ago that I was going to break in and take a look around. Cut to last night. I didn't really have a plan per se, other than wear black and avoid getting caught. Security on campus has been tightened recently, but I didn't have any issues getting in unseen. I'll spare you the details, but basically, you'd be surprised what you could do with a crowbar and some vandalism. I ended up crawling in through a first floor window. I found myself in an empty dorm room, illuminated only by my phone's flashlight. Now, one of the rumors is that the basement is haunted, so that's where I decided to go first. At the time, I thought I was some ballsy explorer, but I can't even express how thoroughly scared shitless I was. This building was dark, old, and smelled weird, and I thought that at any moment, something would come around the corner and tear me apart. It didn't help that my phone battery was being sucked dry by the flashlight app, so I was forced to use it very conservatively. Foresight is not my forte. Anyway, the basement. There wasn't any alleged faceless man ghost, or at least not that I saw, but this is where shit starts to get weird. Let me just set the scene. I very carefully descend the stairs. I open the door at the bottom and step into, well, a room. A completely normal room, although a little colder and with a stickier floor than I would have preferred, but otherwise completely normal. I swept my flashlight across the opposite wall, and there was another door. Probably just a laundry room, I thought. I'll go in there and take a look around, and then get out of here before I piss myself. And then I could brag to my friends that I explored the basement of one of the abandoned dorms. But it wasn't the laundry room. I opened the door to a sea of red on the floor. There was a drain in the middle of the room, but it seemed to be clogged with various organic materials. Shiny, red organic materials. I caught a glimpse of a black pentagon-like thing on the ceiling, and then I fucking ran. Up the stairs, down the hall, and out of the window I busted earlier. I didn't stop running until I got back to my dorm. I laid in bed, wide awake, absolutely terrified. I managed to fall asleep sometime after my roommate left for class. I got up around 11 o'clock. I found a piece of paper that had been slipped under the door. Did you like what you saw? It was written in bright red ink. It's gotta be someone just fucking with me, but damn, they're good at it, because this legitimately creeped me out. I'm 16 years old and currently live next to a vacant house. Barely even a vacant house, more like abandoned. I never knew why the town never made an effort to fix it up and sell it. That never really bothered me though. Not until after a recent disturbing event. My bedroom faces the neighboring house in question, and sometimes on hot nights when I had the window open, I would feel like I could hear voices or moaning type noises coming from the neighboring house. Sometimes I even wondered if those sounds were teens sneaking into the house and having sex. But one night, that changed. It was a Thursday night in July. I was on my bed playing video games home alone when I muted the TV, thinking I heard something from outside. I went to my window and literally gasped when I heard a brief scream coming from inside the abandoned house. It wasn't drawn out at all, it only lasted about maybe a second, and I could just barely hear it. My adrenaline was rushing now. I wanted to get closer immediately. I shut off the lights and TV, took my airsoft gun as a mock weapon, and hopped the backyard fence over to the abandoned house's backyard. I knew the back door was left unlocked since I had been in there before with friends. I simply opened the back sliding door quietly and crept inside just a bit to listen for any more sounds. There was a weird, steady, creaking type noise. It was very low, but it was evident. It was also as dark as it could get in there. I flicked on the light attachment on my airsoft gun and aimed it in front of me, actually feeling pretty cool for a moment. I now stepped fully into the house, and the sound grew louder. I scanned the living room, completely empty, as were the other rooms on this floor. I crept over to the basement door, which was open. The sound was coming from down there. I felt my heart begin to race, and my gut instinct was telling me to turn around and leave now. But I guess my teen boy adrenaline and curiosity got the better of me. I took one step at a time down the stairway as the creaking sound got louder. and when the opening to the basement finally became visible, I aimed the gun light around the room. I froze when the light landed on something that was moving. It was a rocking chair. I got a serious pain in my stomach when I saw the back of somebody's head sitting in the rocking chair. When the light landed on them, the chair stopped rocking. I ran up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, ran outside, slammed the back door shut, and locked my front and back door after getting back inside. I went to my room and stood at the window, watching the house. I then picked up the phone and called my dad. He seemed more surprised than concerned when I told him, confirming that nobody lives there. He calmly told me to get the police over there to check it out. When I hung up the phone, I looked out the window again. And right across from me, on the same level, there was somebody standing at the upstairs window of the abandoned house with the window open. I shut the blinds and called the police. They told me to keep watch through my window, and when I lifted the blinds back up, he was gone. I just hoped he was still in the house by the time the cops showed up. But of course, just my luck, the house was devoid of any people or furniture. Well, except for one thing. A single wooden rocking chair in the otherwise empty basement. After moving to the dorms for college, I started drinking a lot more than I did in high school. It changed me. During winter break, I came back home to my parents' house to spend the holidays with my family. New Year's was just becoming a holiday that I looked forward to, since it entailed a lot of partying with other people my age. It was New Year's Eve night. My parents were out at a friend's party. I had my two best friends over. I'll call them Jim and Steve. That was really our hometown squad back then. We didn't have that many other friends that liked to go out. I had them over to drink and hang out while we figured out our plans for the night. Jim apparently was talking to this girl who invited him to a party across town. She told him that we could come too, so that was our plan. We downed a few shots of rum, then polished off a few cans of beer each, and we each were pretty drunk. Jim called an Uber to the address the girl gave him, and we all split it 3 ways. Jim said he never met this girl, but that they matched on Tinder a week ago, and that she was really pretty and seemed cool based on her texting style. The Uber driver pulled us up in front of some storage-looking building. This was apparently the address. We were confused. Jim read the address over, and we all confirmed on our phones that this building was what came up under the address. Before allowing the Uber driver to leave, Jim confirmed with the girl he was talking to that it was in fact this building and not a house. Almost instantly, she texted back confirming this. So we all got out from the Uber, and then he slowly disappeared down the street. We made jokes about not really wanting to go in and calling the Uber to come back, but ultimately we ended up just going in. We looked for an entryway, and it seemed there was a small door left open with a big guy standing by it. We approached him and asked if this was the party. He nodded his head and pointed in the doorway without saying a word. Pretty sketchy. We walked into this very dark, narrow hallway, following a lone ceiling light hanging at the end of the hall. We were getting closer to the sound of the loud, rumbling music. We got to the end of the hall and found the opening to, I guess, what was supposed to be the party floor. It wasn't nearly as big on the inside as the outside. It was very dark, the only lighting being from a couple cheap-looking strobe light machines. There wasn't a huge crowd, maybe 20 to 30 people sprawled out throughout the area. No one was really dancing either. Everyone was kind of standing in their own little circles. A lot of people were just sitting in chairs by themselves, kind of eyeing us down. The weirdest and most off-putting thing of all, though, we didn't see any females. The music was very loud and hard to talk over, so we moved to a corner further from the speakers and the crowds. I yelled at Jim to call that girl and ask her where she is. She texted back saying she's in the back section, just beyond the double doors. She told us to meet her there. This didn't sound right, and I told Jim that. He said we'd just take a peek back there and leave if she's not there. Jim led the way, following the directions from this girl. We went through these 2 doors held open by door stoppers into this dimly lit narrow hall with a bunch of doors. As we walked, someone quickly appeared from one of the rooms and whispered something in Jim's ear. Jim kept saying what, looking very confused. Then he turned to us and waved his hand saying, "Let's just get out of here." We didn't question it. As we walked back through that little main dance hall, I could tell we were getting looked at again. Some big guy at one of the doors tried stopping us for whatever reason. We just walked through him back down the hall we came through. We noticed he was following us, and finally Jim yelled, "Run," and started sprinting down the hall. That's when I knew shit was real. We followed, and the guy behind us yelled at the top of his lungs, "Yo, stop them," probably to the guy standing at the entry door. He didn't really make an effort to stop us though when we ran back out the front door. We ran out of the little parking lot into the closest main road, where we called an Uber again. Jim explained that the dude in the hall whispered in his ear to get out of there before midnight, as they were going to trap everyone in there. Jim didn't ask any more questions. He basically just told us to haul ass out. This led us to believe that girl he was talking to didn't exist. It was just some kind of trap to lure unsuspecting victims into whatever was about to go down in that building that night. We made an anonymous police report that something was going down in there that night, and that it should be investigated and shut down. We spent midnight on that New Year's sitting in my living room by ourselves. We never found out what transpired in that warehouse. It was New Year's Eve of 2016. My girlfriend and I were hosting a party in my condo. I invited about 30 people and said they could bring whoever they want as long as they were respectful of my place. As we were setting things up for the party, we kept losing things and then finding them back in the same place a few minutes later, like the TV remote, her bag, or just anything we seemed to need at the moment. We thought we were just imagining it, but it kept happening over and over. We figured it was the two of us just accidentally moving stuff without the other knowing. Our guests started pouring in around 9 to 10. That's when we told everyone to arrive. Since my friends would be bringing friends, I positioned some of my surveillance cameras in rooms with valuables, such as the living room and the bedrooms. By the time everyone was over, things were still kind of disappearing. Like at one point, I wanted to show my friends my new pair of shoes my girlfriend got me for Christmas, and I couldn't find them. And even more, my window was left open in my bedroom. Albeit it was a party, and I had to assume my girlfriend or some of the guests had to do with some of this stuff. But it started getting weird. Nevertheless, the condo was crowded, and I didn't have much time to be worrying about this stuff. I told myself I'd check the surveillance footage after the party, or if things persisted, I'd check it during the party. There were a handful of faces I didn't recognize, but I met most of them through whichever friends brought them over. That time of the night that people either can't wait for or dread finally came, and we all started to gather around the TV to watch the ball drop in Times Square. I looked around the room and noticed some tall guy in a black trench coat facing the wall opposite the TV. He was looking down at the couch doing something. I was about to ask my friend Alan if he knew who that was, but everyone started counting down, so I turned my attention to that and joined in. Everyone yelled Happy New Year and all that, and anyone who came as a couple got their New Year's kiss. And when everyone settled down a bit, I realized that tall guy wasn't in the room anymore. I asked Alan if he knew who that tall guy was, and he said, "Yeah, that's Tom's friend." So that was that. One of my friend's girlfriends eventually came downstairs and said whoever the guy in the trench coat was wasn't leaving the bathroom. I told her it was Tom's friend, and to just use the master bedroom bathroom, so she went back upstairs. Eventually the clock hit 2 a.m., and that's when things were dwindling down and people were starting to make their exits. When everyone was gone, my girlfriend and I said we'd clean up tomorrow. However, we did a quick inspection to make sure nothing was stolen. Her bag was gone completely this time, and so was one of my expensive watches. I rushed to our bedroom to pause the video cameras so I could download the footage and play it back. We started watching from the time guests started to arrive. I had it on fast forward, and we just skimmed all 3 cameras. Eventually, we noticed Tom's friend in the trench coat in the guest bedroom, going through our stuff. I paused the footage in a fit of rage. I cut the footage to a 30-second clip and sent it to my phone, and then texted Tom immediately. I said, "Your friend stole shit from my apartment, bro." He texted back, "Dude, no way, what do you mean?" Then I sent him the footage. A minute later, he texted back, "Who the hell is that? I don't know who that is." I wrote back, "I was told that was your friend." Once again, he said, "Dude, I don't know that guy." My girlfriend and I got nervous now, so I went on a texting spree, texting all of my friends who came, asking if they knew that person. From everyone who was still awake, we got a bunch of no's. So we went to finish the video footage, following the guy in the trench coat. He made his way into our bedroom, opened the door, then started dropping some of our belongings out the window, including my girlfriend's bag. I felt like the room was spinning and my heart was in my throat. Then, the man in the video quickly turned around as if he heard someone coming up the stairs, and he crawled under the bed. We sped through the rest of the video footage, but he never got out from under the bed. Under the bed that we were currently sitting on using the laptop. I saw the fear in my girlfriend's eyes, and her temptation to scream, but I covered her mouth with my hand and whispered in her ear, "Run on the count of 3. But she couldn't help it. She let out a cry. So I had to yell at her to just run out of the room. I pushed her off the bed and followed close behind. I took a look under the bed before slamming the door shut, and I saw him down there under the bed. We made eye contact. It was an indescribable moment. We called the cops in the kitchen, both grabbing big kitchen knives. Police made it to my condo in like 3 minutes, but by that time the intruder was gone, and our bedroom window was once again open. He escaped through the window and got away with our belongings. I handed over the video footage files to the police department, and they would review it and record an image of the man's face. Of course, he was never found. At least not by our local police department. When I was in my senior year of high school, 17 years old, all that was on my and my friends' minds were girls. There was one girl in particular in my physics class that I was really into. Her name was Tiffany. Some guys called her Crazy Tiff because she was super hot, but also apparently really crazy according to her exes. That's irrelevant to this story though. Basically, my best friend CJ managed to get one of Tiffany's best friends, Gianna, to agree to come hang out at some beach with him and I that night since it was a Friday and the weather was warm. The best part, Tiffany agreed to come with. This was it, my big chance with Crazy Tiff. CJ pulled up to my house at 10 o'clock that night. I hopped in shotgun and we went to pick up Tiffany and Gianna. On our way there, we agreed our first priority was getting me alone with Tiffany and CJ getting alone with Gianna. I was extremely nervous, but when Tiffany and Gianna got in the car, things were actually going pretty smoothly. CJ and I managed to make them laugh a bunch of times. By the time we got to the beach, I was confident Tiffany and I would vibe really well alone. I don't remember the tiny details of what happened after we stepped out of the car and onto the dunes, but I do remember the beach being completely void of any other people, and CJ somehow managed to go off alone with Gianna into the darkness after a few minutes, just like we planned. Tiffany and I took a walk down to the water and wet our feet and whatnot. Then we just laid in the sand and talked for a while. Things were going smoothly until Tiffany pointed out to the ocean. "What is that?" she said. I looked to where she was pointing but didn't see anything. I was laughing at her apparent delusion and got up to go closer to the water in hopes of maybe seeing what she saw. My feet touched the cold water, and that's when I was close enough to see it. There was a long, vertically standing object in the water. I inched a little closer and saw it move. I jumped out of the water and ran back to Tiffany. "It's a person," I said quietly to her. It was truly bizarre, the fact that anyone would be in the freezing cold water at this hour. Tiffany wanted to move because she was uncomfortable, and it seemed like whoever it was just watching us. Somehow it just felt like that. So we took a walk further down the beach until we thought we had privacy. We sat back down on the beach with nothing but the sound of the ocean waves and our voices. But Tiffany was once again the one to point out something. "Do you hear that?" she asked me. I did kind of hear it. It was like a smaller kind of splashing sound, but it stopped just as soon as it started. We looked out to the ocean, and I heard Tiffany gasp. The guy was out there again. I was gonna go out there and tell him to back off, but Tiffany told me, "Let's just go." Low-key, I was hoping she would. I just wanted to look tough in front of her. We got back to the car. CJ and Gianna weren't back yet. Suddenly, my phone started blowing up with texts, all from CJ. Apparently, he'd been texting me in some kind of panic the whole time we were on the beach, and I guess I didn't have reception out by the water. He texted me first saying, dude, some weird guy is in the water watching us. And then, yo, some weird deformed looking guy is stalking us. Get to the car now. 5 minutes later, he sent a couple other texts, basically panicking over being followed by something in the dark. Keyword something, not someone, something. His second to last text said he was coming to look for us and to answer when I got this. His last text was, "We're on our way back to the car now, get there." He also tried calling me 3 times apparently. I called him back at once and he picked up right away out of breath, not even letting me speak. All he asked was if we were at the car, and I said yes. He said good, stay right there, and hung up the phone. Less than 30 seconds later, Gianna and CJ came out of the surrounding darkness next to the Jeep. He explained the best he could while trying to catch his breath that some deformed-looking creature walking on 2 legs was following them. I didn't know whether to laugh at what he said or not. I told him about how we saw someone in the water too. He asked me to describe what it looked like. I kept getting confused by his way of describing the person, as if they were a creature. I told him it looked like a really tall, lanky person standing in the water. He said he got a chance to get a closer look at it, and it was some kind of deformed humanoid thing. Tiffany and I looked at each other, and now we kind of nervously laughed. What he was saying was just too bizarre, but I think parts of both of us took him seriously. Gianna vouched for what he was saying. That scream made us all jump into the car. It was some kind of half-human, half-demonic kind of screaming. I can't describe it, you just have to hear it. Needless to say, we were all frantic in the car, asking CJ questions mainly. But closer to the end of the ride, we all grew silent. I guess we were all just lost in our thoughts about what just happened. To give you an idea of how quickly all this happened, we were on the dunes for about half an hour. After I heard that sound, that scream, I did start to believe CJ partially, but I still feel like what I saw in the ocean was a person. But CJ's way of describing who, or what was following him as some kind of deformed humanoid thing on the beach is what still freaks me out the most. Our old town in Florida was right by a bunch of different beaches. My sisters and I would frequently go to the beach during the sunset hours because less people were there and the views were always beautiful. Sometimes we'd play volleyball, sometimes we'd go in the water, and sometimes we'd just lay in the sand. My youngest sister Ksenia, who was 13 years old, wanted to go in the water one night. The sun was setting and it was getting dark out, so as the older brother and basically the supervisor, I told her to be back in 10 minutes. She ran into the water, and after watching her for about a minute, I looked down at my phone. My other sister, who was 16 years old, wanted to play volleyball. I was up for it. There was a volleyball net and a poorly inflated volleyball sitting next to it. It was good enough, though. We made do with it. When I looked away from the volleyball net, I couldn't see Ksenia. I looked every possible direction she could have gone in the water. I did not see her. It was getting darker and harder to see. I ran to the water to try and find Ksenia. I ran into the water, and when I couldn't run anymore, I swam. She wasn't in the water anywhere, though. But I saw a boat nearby. A big, luxurious boat, close enough to swim over to. It took me a couple minutes, but I got there. I hoisted myself up onto the bow, off some tiny step ladder, and I heard laughing below deck. There was a hatch door that was opened, and there were lights on down there. I called out for help. Then there was silence. I called out that I was looking for my sister. Then I heard Ksenia's voice from below the deck. She called out my name. I hurried down the stairs into the cabin to see Ksenia sitting on a bed with a Coke in her hand. Further down the cabin were 2 grown-ass men sitting opposite each other, looking at me. I grabbed Ksenia into my arms, and one of the men said with a smile that I have a very nice sister. The other man seemed to catch on to my suspicion right away and claimed that the 2 of them were just offering to give her a ride and some snacks because they saw her all alone in the water. I didn't even say a word to them. One of them asked if we needed a ride back to shore. I didn't answer. I told Ksenia to swim back to the beach with me. We got back to shore in a couple minutes, and the boat was far gone into the sunset. I brought my 2 sisters home and had my dad figure out what he should do. First of all, he was mad at me for not getting details of the boat or the men's faces, and he was right. My dad punished Ksenia and prohibited her from going to the beach past sunrise from there on out. I have a beach house in Florida that I tend to visit with my girlfriend in the colder months up north. In the warmer months, we'd still visit occasionally, but nowhere near as much since there wasn't as much of a need to. It was early February, freezing up in Connecticut, so my girlfriend and I took a trip down to Florida to visit the beach house. By the time we actually got to the house after the day-and-a-half drive, it was starting to get dark out. It was actually a long month and a half since I'd been there last at the time. The electricity, the water, and everything was already on since it was wintertime, and I kept everything on during the winter season due to our frequent visits. So all we had to do when we arrived to the house was unpack, take a couple lounge chairs, and walk 20 seconds onto the beach and take a nap. We didn't even check out any of the other rooms because we were so drained. We lounged on the beach until it got really dark. Then my girlfriend tapped my shoulder. I looked up at her, and she asked if I left that light on. I turned to the house and saw one of the upstairs lights on. Not just that, but at one of the windows in that room, there was a shadow outline behind the partially opened curtains. I looked at my girlfriend and she looked at me, and I think it sunk into both of us that someone was in that room at that window. I told her to wait there. I ran to the house as fast as I could. When I got to the back door is when I started being quiet. I slid it open and shut quietly, and being that I was barefoot made tiptoeing a bit easier. I made it to the stairway and then halfway out the stairs before I heard a door shut upstairs. I went up the remaining stairs a bit quicker now and saw that the door to the room that had the light on was open, but the lights were off now. I went into the room which had the light on not even 2 minutes ago. I kept the light off though. Instead, I just used the flashlight which I had on the shelf ledge upstairs. Then I remembered the closet door. It was shut. That must have been the door I heard close, I figured. I shut off the flashlight as I tiptoed to the door of the closet and slowly put my ear up to it to listen. There was nothing but silence in the room and on the other side of the closet door. I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I opened that door, if someone was in fact on the other side, but I had to confront this. I grabbed the 2 little knobs and finally brought myself to yank the doors open, but it was empty in there, or at least from what I could tell, it was dark. I grabbed my flashlight and switched it on, and yep, the closet was empty, but a creak in the floorboards outside of the room caught my attention. I ran into the hall expecting to see the intruder, but no, it was just my girlfriend. I got mad at her for coming into the house, even though I told her to stay put. But now that she was there, I told her to help search the upstairs. We looked around in all 3 bedrooms upstairs, all the closets, and the bathroom, but there was no one. Then we checked the downstairs. Every room, every closet. No one. We had to figure that whoever was in the house somehow escaped, so we locked all the doors and looked around the house for any signs of breaking and entering or stolen items. But there was neither of that. So we brushed up and went to bed since we were exhausted. However, that night before we could even fall asleep, there was a click under our bed. I asked my girlfriend if she could hear that. She said yes. I got out from under the bed and got down on my knees. When my face got to the ground level giving me a view under the bed, I could see the intruder laying under our bed. I looked at him face to face before he crawled out and made a break for the front door. I couldn't catch him once he got outside because I was still barefoot. I also didn't get a very good look at his face because we only looked at each other for about a second. We once again searched the whole house to see what he could have stolen, but surprisingly, nothing was stolen. We couldn't even figure out how he broke in. We didn't call the cops. We simply moved on and did our best to enjoy the rest of our vacation. I used to play a lot of hide and seek with my friends when we were young. A team version of the game though, so it was a little different. Instead of having a lone seeker who tags anybody, we would have a team of seekers and a team of hiders. And for the hiders to win, they would have to get to a certain checkpoint, and seekers would win if they tagged all the hiders. To tag one of the hiders, the seeker would have to two-hand touch their back, just like touch football. It started when we all formed our group on the block around 8 years old, all the way up until we were about 13. I lived in a cul-de-sac where there were 3 other houses besides mine, and kids my age lived in each one. There were also 4 other kids right outside the cul-de-sac around our age, so ever since I was little I had a group of neighboring friends. When we would play hide and seek, we would usually play in the cul-de-sac, since there was a lot of open space, trees, bushes, and each of the houses belonged to one of us, so we could use all the property space for the game as well. Plus, the cul-de-sac was right in front of our town's nature preserve park, so it also made it more fun to have the woods as an added hiding spot. It was 2008. I was 11 years old, a time and age we would still play hide and seek on Friday nights instead of going out to flirt with girls. We had only 6 of us this night, so we divided our 2 teams into 3s and split up. We were first to hide. The other team began counting down from 30, while we all went our separate ways to different houses. I ran to my next door neighbor's house and came up with a really creative idea. My friend had a green blanket outside on his patio, sitting under a couple flower pots. I carefully moved the flower pots and took the green blanket, folding it over my body and crawling over to the bushes near the edge of the woods. Since our houses met the edge of the nature preserve, we could all choose if we wanted a back fence or not, and my next door neighbors chose not to have one, meaning the woods connected to some of our backyards. I heard the backyard gate open, so I quickly ran into the woods and knelt down under the green blanket. I would occasionally lift the blanket over my head to see who was there, and eventually I saw one of my friends creeping around the backyard, checking under the table and such. So while they were distracted, I waddled on my knees to the backyard of the next house over, where I could hear the commotion of one of my teammates getting caught. I lifted the blanket over my head to see what was going on, and I saw someone on the other team escorting my teammate back outside to the street. This was the perfect opportunity for me to run for it. I dropped the blanket completely and just looked around one last time before getting ready to make a break for it. Then, the most unexpected happened. The sound of a shoe on freshly fallen leaves and twigs snapped from right behind my ears, and before I could even turn around, I felt 2 hands grab my shoulders with a very strong and tight grip. I squealed in pain for a bit and screamed stop, managing to escape the grip and run for the checkpoint. I didn't make it to the checkpoint anyway though, because I ran into one of the seekers right at the backyard gates. We went out to the street where I found out that both of my teammates were already out, and the 2 other seekers were already waiting by the street. "Wait," I said. "If all of you guys are already out here, who was the one who found me in the woods?" I asked. They all looked at each other, seemingly confused. None of them owned up to it. They all swore they hadn't even gone into the woods. As I realized they were telling the truth, I felt my heart skip a few beats before pumping back up in a rapid beat, twice as fast as normal. When I told them that somebody was in the woods and grabbed me with force, they didn't believe me at first, but I convinced them. We all went to tell our parents, and the cops were called. Unfortunately for my neighbor friend, his parents put up a 4th fence wall, separating the woods to the backyard. We continued to play hide and seek and flashlight tag past this incident up until around the age of 13. Our parents just made us carry flashlights from now on and left all the backyard lights on. And of course, the woods were off limits. I'm happy to have such fond memories with friends as a young child, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that this was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. This happened when I was 10 years old. I lived in a small town in New York State that didn't have much going on at all. The house next door to mine was vacant for the longest time, until one day a moving truck pulled up in front, and a woman, a kid my age, and a toddler stepped out. Me and my dad had been sitting on the stoop talking, so we were able to go over and greet them right away. The mom seemed pretty normal, though there was something slightly off about her personality. My dad and the mom introduced me and the other boy my age to each other. He introduced himself as CJ, and then reached out his hand for a handshake, which for kids our age at the time was very weird. I shook his hand, and I remember both of our parents laughed. My dad ended up pressuring me on the spot to go hang out with CJ upstairs in my room. I wasn't against it, so I led him up to my room. I sat down on my bed, and he just stared at me blankly, creepily. I asked him if he wanted to play Mario Kart, and he didn't even know what that was. I showed him a few of my video games, and he said he doesn't like video games, so I suggested we play hide and seek outside. That he agreed to. I told him he could hide first to familiarize himself with the properties, while I gave him a 60-second head start. He ran into his new backyard, and I started counting down from 60. When it came time to find him, I found him in literally the most obvious place he could be. He was standing behind the chimney, a spot that I had to pass to get into the backyard. From this point on, I was starting to wonder if maybe this kid wasn't all there. After 10 minutes of an anticlimactic game of hide and seek, I said I had homework to do. He asked if he could come inside with me, and I didn't know what to say. Every excuse I came up with, he would find another way of asking to come inside. Eventually, however, he did leave me alone, and I went inside. Realistically, I had nothing to do. I just didn't like the kid and didn't want to further any kind of friendship with him. That night, something terrifying happened. I awoke to a thud at my bedside window. I sat up and lifted the window up. I was disturbed to see CJ's face at the upstairs window of the neighboring house. He leaned out his window and called out for me to come over and play hide and seek. I yelled over he's insane and told him to go back to sleep and leave me alone. I aggressively slammed my window shut, as well as the blind, and tried to go back to sleep. Two more times a rock or something was thrown at my window, but I ignored it. When it seemed to stop, I was relieved, and finally felt at ease. 10 minutes or so later, I heard a noise coming from below my window outside. It sounded like a bird was hopping around the ledge or something possibly. The sound kept getting closer though, and then I heard a thud come from right below my window. I didn't know what to think. What if CJ was out there? Was he trying to climb up to my window? The thought of it was so disturbing it was almost comical. Then I heard the slightest creak of the floorboards near my bedroom door. I turned to face the doorway and screamed at the sight of CJ standing at my door in his pajamas. He said in a quiet voice, "Let's play hide and seek." My dad was in the room quicker than I could even get out of my bed. He was just as shocked and disturbed as I was. He angrily marched over to the new neighbor's house with CJ in his grip. I watched the whole thing through my window. He raised his voice quite a few times. It turned out CJ simply entered through an unlocked window downstairs. My dad got a restraining order against the woman and her son. Unfortunately, they weren't going anywhere though. For months after this incident, I would have to awkwardly avoid eye contact with the mother next door the few times I saw her. Strangely, I never once saw CJ outside of the house again. However, every single night for over a month, I would check outside my bedroom window across to the other house and see CJ just sitting by his window looking into mine with his creepy blank stare. It got to a point where I eventually left the blinds to that window closed 24/7, and eventually it stopped. CJ and his mom moved out less than a year later, and luckily I never saw them again. my early days after graduating college, I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to rent an apartment with someone else who I'd never met before. He'd become my roommate, and his name was Randall. At first, he seemed easy enough to get along with. He didn't talk too much, but he had a heavy Spanish accent. The room I'd be getting was already furnished, and that was one of the appealing factors to this apartment. It had a twin-sized bed tucked in the corner, a nice-sized dresser, a closet, and a TV stand in another corner of the room. There were a bunch of stuffed animals sitting on the dresser though, which I found a bit odd. Most notably, a big teddy bear facing the bed. When I asked Randall about the stuffed animals, he gave a really loud laugh and said his room had the same thing. He recommended I leave them be as to show respect to the landlord. I didn't really talk to Randall much that first day other than that. I spent most of my time unpacking my clothes and supplies and setting up my TV. When I was laying in the bed watching TV that night, I thought I heard something. It was a very brief noise, but it was definitely audible, and it sounded like some kind of small electronic component. I chalked it up to being a house noise and continued my show. The next day, Randall wasn't home all day. I didn't know if or where he worked, but I just assumed he was at work. That night, when I was in my room watching TV, I heard the front door open and Randall walked through the hall to his room before shutting the door. A little later, I was getting changed into my pajamas when I heard the same sound from the night before. This time without the TV noise in the background, so I heard it much clearer. It was definitely some kind of electronic device, but I didn't know what or where. It still didn't seem like a big deal, so I got into my bed and started reading my current book at the time, then went to sleep. The next day, I saw Randall when I came home after work, and he asked me what book I was reading. At first I didn't get the question, but then he said he was talking about the book that I was reading in my room. I looked at him in silence and confusion. I asked him how he knew I was reading a book, and he said in his heavy Spanish accent that he had to go into my room just to take something out that he left in there, and that's when he noticed the book. I asked him nicely not to go into my room anymore. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lock on the door, so I couldn't stop him when I wasn't home. That night, when I grabbed my book from under my bed, I stopped and wondered, how would he see my book if I had it under my bed? Thinking about this now creeped me out, and I was in no mood to read anymore. I looked around the room as I thought to myself, then I noticed that big teddy bear on the dresser again. How it was angled so perfectly to face me in the bed. Then I had a thought, a scary thought. I stood up and walked over to the bear, grabbed it, and looked closely into its eyes. I felt my heart skip a beat when I realized there was a camera in one of the eye holes. I threw the thing into the corner of the room and went to Randall's door and tried opening it. His door apparently had a lock because it wouldn't open, but I knew he was in there. I pounded on the door screaming his name, but he wouldn't answer. I saw the light sneaking in through the bottom of the door go dark, as I assumed he turned off the light. I went back to my room and called the landlord. I explained everything and told him I'm leaving right now, and I had a valid reason to void the contract. I packed the little amount of things I brought into my car and left that same night, never looking back. The landlord surprisingly never even came to me to collect the money for those few days I was there. Ever since that night, I have a phobia of stuffed bears. Like, I always have to turn them away so that they're not facing me. It's 2016. Our new neighbors invite our family over for a nighttime barbecue. My mom and my dad and my sister and I meet in their backyard at like 8 o'clock. This is the first time that I personally meet them. It's just a husband and wife and a teenage boy. I quickly learn the boy's name is Jeremy. The husband seems to be the nicest of them all. There's something cold about the wife, and the son Jeremy seems to have some kind of mental or social issues because he won't talk at all. He constantly looks all over the place, and he seems to be really sad or gloomy. I also catch him staring at me a few times. Each time I grow increasingly uncomfortable around him and try even harder not to look at him anymore. After eating a burger and hot dog each, our parents pretty much talk to his parents. I wait a little bit before sneaking back to our house because I was bored and uncomfortable. The next day on my walk to school, since I live 2 blocks away from the high school, I turned my head around a few houses after passing our neighbor's house, and and see someone jump behind a tree as if to be hiding. I turn back in front of me and start to walk faster. I get to the last block before the school and turn around again. This time I see the same person hiding in a bush in front of someone's house. It's Jeremy. I can tell by his long hair, and he's looking right at me. I walk as fast as I can without running, and make it to the school safely a minute later. When I get home that day, I tell my parents, and they go over and talk to the neighbors. When my parents come back to talk to me, I learn from them that Jeremy is apparently not like the other kids, according to his parents word for word. That also seemed to be enough explanation for my parents to tell me to just ignore him, as if him following me to school wasn't an insanely creepy thing to do. Later on, I go outside to sit on the patio and do my homework, and just as Jeremy and his creepiness come to mind, I turn to look at the neighboring house, up at the only window that overlooks our backyard. And there he is. Jeremy is sitting at that window looking at me, but as he notices me, he quickly hides. I run inside and tell my parents, and they once again quote what his parents said and tell me not to worry about him. Later that night, after texting friends and whatnot in bed, I finally put my phone down on the desk and roll on my side to go to sleep. A certain amount of time that I can't remember passes before I hear a click at my window, and then suddenly my window slides open. Without even knowing who's there, I scream at the top of my lungs, and soon my parents come rushing inside, all while I'm pressing up against the wall in shock as someone climbs through my window into my room. My parents turn on the lights, revealing Jeremy holding a large kitchen knife. Everyone screams, including my father, as he comes and grabs me to pull me out of the room. The four of us all rush to the neighbor's house to tell them. The man next door leads us into our own house and grabs his son when he finds him in the living room. He snatches the knife from his hands and tugs him out of the house. My dad sends all of us inside as he stays outside screaming at the man next door. Moments later, he comes back inside and calls the police to get a restraining order. My dad promised those neighbors a living hell if they were not moved out by the next week. The police come and take Jeremy away, probably to some kind of place for people with mental disabilities, not a regular jail. Moving along to a week later, Jeremy didn't stay in that house anymore. We don't know where he stays now, but we've never seen him since. This story was by far the scariest thing to ever happen in my life. I went to a bar with my friends on a Saturday night, and as we usually did, we all got decently intoxicated. The night became a complete blur about an hour after showing up to the bar. I vaguely remember talking to a few guys that came up to me. Didn't remember anything out of the ordinary, though. I live walking distance to the bar we were at that night, so I guess when I got tired or bored, I left. And I do remember walking to my house that night. I think it was when I was starting to sober up a little bit. We always used to leave a key under a flower pot in our stoop, and I always used that key on nights like this so that I wouldn't have to walk around with my keys on me while I'm drunk. I got home, locked the door behind me, and went straight to my room to fall into my bed. I skipped the changing into pajamas and brushing my teeth and whatnot. I did lay there awake with my phone in my hands, texting my friends, seeing if they were still there and making sure they got home okay though. Suddenly, I heard the front door open downstairs. The only thing I was thinking was that it could be my little brother getting home, since he usually got home really late. My best friend texted back asking how I got away from the guy. I replied back, "What guy?" She said the creep that wouldn't stop talking to me at the bar. The bar was such a blur that I didn't remember which specific guy she could be talking about. I heard some noises downstairs. I assumed my brother was making a late-night snack in the kitchen. Then I heard walking up the stairs. My best friend texted me again saying she saw him leave the bar right after me. Now I was still decently drunk, but still, I was starting to become suspicious. Steps came up the stairs outside, then stopped outside my door. Then the door quietly opened. It was dark outside of the room too, so I couldn't see who was standing at my door. I said my brother's name, and then the door shut. But I didn't hear whoever it was walk away, so I was led to believe they were standing outside my door. I immediately texted my brother asking if it was him. Surprisingly, he texted back right away saying, "Was what me? And why do you keep opening the front door?" We live with our mom. She's the only other person in the house, but she was away for the week, so I didn't know what to think, other than it was an intruder. I called the cops without telling my brother, and hearing 911 "what is your emergency" for the first time in my life really made the situation seem that much more severe. I described what I believed to be a break-in, and as I was on the phone, I leaned over and turned on my bedroom lamp. As the room went from dark to bright, I saw a man standing in the corner of the room by the door. I screamed and shrieked while still on the line with a 911 operator, who kept asking what's wrong. The man in the corner opened the door and fled the scene. I heard him run out the front door. I stayed on the line with the operator, who advised me every move I should make until a cop car actually showed up. I was still intoxicated, so the info I gave on the police report was probably not the most accurate, but I described the man to be mid-20s looking, stocky, full beard, and a short haircut. One of the two officers then lifted his hand, revealing a key he was holding, and said he found that in the front door lock. It was the spare key that we keep under the flower pot. The intruder used it to get in, meaning he followed me home and watched me take the key from under the pot. The officer told me to rest assured he'd be patrolling close around the area all night, and advised my brother and I to keep our doors locked and find a new hiding spot for the key. The next day, besides my hangover, I felt relieved. I told my friends about what happened, and they described everything in detail. That some creepy-looking guy in the bar had been following me all night trying to talk to me every chance he got, and somehow I was oblivious to it. I took a long break from going to bars, and we don't hide a key outside anymore.
It was July 4th, 2007. I was 16 years old, and I had nothing to do for the night. My older sister Alicia, who has 9 years on me, was going to some huge party upstate. I think it was referred to as the Rockaway Bomb Show, where a bunch of young, out-of-college adults would go to drink and go crazy. Surprisingly, when I told my sister that I had no plans, she invited me to come with her and her boyfriend Alex. Now, I was a shy kid, so maybe that's why she was inviting me, to help me break out of my shell. But being 16 years old, it was definitely out of my comfort zone to go attend some crazy drinking party full of 20-year-olds. Somehow though, she guilted me into going. We'd have to stay at a motel overnight there, so I packed my stuff, and within 2 hours, Alicia was honking the horn outside. It was a long drive, close to 4 hours. By the time we arrived, the sky was already turning that bright orange as the sun was setting. We pulled into some sketchy-looking road with a sign that said "Fireworks Show this way." I rolled down the window and already heard a huge crowd of people in the distance. As we passed the tree lines on either side into the clearing, we could see a transportable stage, a bunch of tables scattered everywhere, and a food and drink bar. People in their low 20s everywhere, all holding beers or other alcoholic beverages. I felt my heart sink a little in social nervousness. Alicia parked the car on the grass because really there was no parking lot and the parking was basically a free-for-all. I followed Alicia and Alex to the party, and they immediately coincidentally found some of their friends who already seemed drunk. They introduced me and we chatted for a bit. Alicia handed me a beer, which I nervously accepted. As soon as I took the first sip, I started getting weird stares from people. I was afraid someone would ask me how old I am. I continued to cling on to Alicia and Alex for another 15 minutes before they both split up and started talking to random people. At that moment, I felt alone and awkward. In the middle of hundreds of college students and graduates all conversing with each other, and here I was, an awkward middle school looking 16-year-old with a beer in his hands all alone. A hand grabbed my shoulder and I turned, thinking it was Alex or Alicia, but it was rather some older guy. I mean, like out of place old. The guy was like in his 40s or 50s, he had a balding head and glasses, he looked like he could be a creepy priest. He then took the beer out of my hand and said, "How old are you?" That hit me hard in the stomach as I choked up for words. I was actually just getting that for my sister." He put the beer on a nearby table and asked me what my name is. I, still thinking this guy was a worker at the show or something, told him Jake. Then he asked me who I'm here with, and I responded, "My sister, like I just told you." Eventually, I talked my way away from the guy and looked for Alicia or Alex. There were so many people here though, and I didn't have a cell phone back then, so I couldn't even text or call them. It got to a point where I felt so alone and awkward that I wandered away from the party and into the woods. I sat on a log reflecting on myself and regretting my decision to come when all of a sudden I heard a huge boom followed by a roar of cheering. The fireworks show had started. I could actually see perfectly fine from where I was sitting, so I decided I'd just stay there. My mind was sucked into the beauty of the fireworks blowing up in the sky. So much so that I forgot about how upset I was. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. Something was wrapped around my mouth and nose. I struggled. I tried to scream and break free. I felt like I was becoming lightheaded. I looked up for anything on the ground to use as a weapon and pulled up a big stick. I tried swinging at the person's leg, but it didn't work. The person pulled me down to the ground and pinned me on my stomach. As a final attempt, I grabbed a big stone from in front of me, and with a single, lucky swing, I struck the person straight in the face. They let loose their grip and let out a grunt, giving me enough time to get up and run. I did take one glance at the person, however, and could see that they were wearing the same thing that the man I saw earlier had been. I ran back to the party where they were shooting off the fireworks and asked the apparent hosts of the party if they knew the man. They said they hadn't. I told them what happened, and one of the guys was like, "Holy shit, buddy, yeah, we're gonna report this." By the end of the night, when my sister and her boyfriend were too drunk to drive, I ended up driving to the motel. I never told anyone in my family about the incident out of embarrassment, but that's something I kind of regret now. My name is Ivan, I'm 15 years old, and this is the scariest experience of my life. So it's the 4th of July, 2015. I live in a calm suburban neighborhood that's usually very quiet, but one night it all changed. My dad had to work extra late since he was covering someone's shift, and my mom was at some friend's house party. This was a Friday night, so I would usually just play games on my computer and talk with friends, basically having my kind of fun. I would do that every single Friday night without any issues. The time was about 9 or 10 p.m. and I was playing my favorite game, League of Legends, talking with some friends, when suddenly I heard a window shut. Or maybe it was something else. I thought it may be the broken dishwasher we had that sounded very loud. I ignored it and wanted to get back to my game, so I increased the volume on my headset. The sound echoed so loud that I could almost hear it with the volume on 96%. I had enough and wanted to see what it was, so I reduced the volume and told my friends to hold on and that I would be right back. The sound wasn't from the dishwasher or the dryer. It wasn't a window either. The sound was still underway though when I came to look what it was. The basement. I had never gone in there since we moved in, and my parents told me to never go down there by myself. Not for suspense reasons or anything like that, but they actually just don't want me going down there moving around any boxes. The basement was dirty, and the door was kind of broken and always gave out creepy drafts when it was open. I went to the basement door and listened. The sound went on for a good 2 minutes before silence. My whole body was actually filled with joy and happiness. But before I could even breathe out and go to my room calmly, the sound started again. First quietly, and then louder and louder and louder. I was completely home alone if you're wondering. No parents, no pets, no babysitters, nothing. I didn't even have any weapons to defend myself either. I was so scared that I started having thoughts about my entire life as if it were flashing before my eyes, so completely sure I was going to pass out or even die. Now the sound was very loud. I went straight to my room and closed and locked the door very quietly. I took my phone and dialed my mom's number. she told me to call the police, which suddenly seemed like a better idea. I called the police, and as I was on the line with the operator, I heard a door opening from all the way downstairs. Because it was so loud, I knew that it was the basement door. The operator told me that they would be over as soon as they could. It was at that moment that the horrific truth hit me. Somebody was in my house. I listened in silence for a few minutes, other than the occasional firework booming in the distance from the outside, as I heard somebody rummaging through our kitchen and living room. I wrote to my friends in the chat, "There's a fucking intruder in my house." Before I could even see what they responded with, I heard footsteps coming upstairs. Thinking on my feet, I opened the window and jumped down 2 stories onto the grass, breaking my left ankle. I was crawling as far as I could away from the window, and when I looked up to the window, I saw him. The most disturbing face which has ever belonged to a man. A crooked mouth, brown, wiry hair, and eyes so dark I couldn't even see them. But I could only see it for a few moments before he turned and walked away from the window. The sounds of cop cars stopping nearby was the greatest thing ever at that moment. I remember watching the police walking the man out to the car in cuffs, and I'll never forget that face, which looked even more horrific up close as he gave me an evil, hateful stare before being driven off in the backseat of that police car. It was the 4th of July, 2 days after my birthday. We live in a very quiet town in New Jersey, so not much was going on. I had just turned 21, so my girlfriend, who had already been 21 for a while, jokingly decided to come over to my house with a couple 6-packs and some fireworks for the holiday. My parents were at one of the neighbors' parties far down the road. We don't have a lot of close-by neighbors. My girlfriend's name is Sophia. When she arrived, we headed to the backyard, where we started drinking the 6-packs together. She brought 2 big firework missiles, a couple bottle rockets, and some firecrackers. Obviously, the missiles were what caught my eye the most. When I finished my second beer, I got off the deck to shoot off the 2 bottle rockets. Up next were the firecrackers. After lighting up the firecrackers, however, I noticed my garage was open all the way across the yard. I told Sophia I'd be right back and walked over to it. I went inside and turned on the light. Every drawer and every closet door had been opened. I called my dad first thing and let him know somebody broke into the garage and possibly robbed us. He had a typical reaction. "Are you serious? Aw, shit. What did they take?" "I don't know," I told him. "Alright, hang tight, I'll be home in a sec to check it out." So my dad was momentarily leaving the party down the block to come check it out. When I got back to the deck, I told Sophia, and she was just in shock. She went to go look herself, and when she came back, we just sat there outside on the backyard deck, waiting. Eventually, I decided to just shoot off the big missiles anyway. I couldn't wait anymore, and it was July 4th after all. Sophia told me to go for it. The first missile was huge. It practically lit up the whole backyard for a second. I loved it. But I knew these 2 missiles were not cheap, so I thanked Sophia again. I lit the second missile, and during those initial few seconds as the fuse was burning, me and Sophia both heard a large branch snapping on the ground from the woods. We both looked in that direction, and as the rocket exploded in the sky, it provided just enough light to see a figure in the woods facing us. We both screamed simultaneously, just in time for my dad to hear. Me and my dad both chased in that direction into the woods, but we couldn't see or hear anything. We completely lost the person. Later that night, we turned on the security camera in the garage that we hadn't used in a long time. At maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, when I was finally going to bed, I looked out my window for the heck of it, and the garage light was on. Me and my dad went to check it out. This time the entire garage had been completely trashed and some of my dad's expensive tools were missing. We went back to the house to check the surveillance footage, and we were disturbed. In the footage, the lights turned on, but the camera was blocked by something. It seemed like a piece of paper. We rushed back to the garage to check it out, and found a simple post-it note taken from the desk in the garage stamped onto the camera, and in writing on the notes were the words, "Happy Independence Day, fuck you." We never found the robber.
Big abandoned mental hospital in our town is always infested with rowdy teenagers drinking, graffitiing, and making a mess with silly string. Eventually the town caught wind of it, and one particular Halloween, when my friends Rye, Carl, and I wanted to go exploring, apparently the town barred off every window on the first floor of the building. Security of the perimeter was also ramped up drastically. We found out the hard way after cutting through the woods and seeing security telling a mob of teens to go home. We didn't give up there though. We snuck around the perimeter through the woods to another side with no people. Then we hopped the fence and started looking for a way in. That's when we found out that all the windows had been barricaded with carbon steel bars. We heard commotion all around us, but managed to stay under the radar. We didn't want to give up though, and through our determination to find a way in, Rye spotted one window that wasn't boarded up with steel, but rather wood planks. We all had boots on, so kicking the plank in seemed plausible. However, the window was simply too high to kick up at, so Carl and I lifted Rye and actually used him and his boots as a sort of battering ram. The wood was wet and apparently rotted, so it actually snapped rather easily. After that, we simply ripped off the remainder of wood, and boom, we had our way in. We had to hurry though, before security might see. We gave Rye a boost up since he's the shortest. Then Carl and I leaped up to the ledge and squeezed in. There was junk and debris everywhere, so I took some long, flat piece of wood and covered the window with it to hide our way of entry. After that, we were all alone in a giant abandoned psych ward to explore on Halloween. Carl brought a few cans of spray paint in his backpack that we planned to use. First, we had to find a good spot to use them. Carl also brought 3 flashlights for us since of course it was pitch black in there. It was also weird stepping out from the cold, windy outside with the commotion and yelling going on to the scarily dead, silent interior. We planned on going to the top to possibly get to the roof, so we looked around for the stairs going through the dead, silent hallways. It really seemed like we were the only ones who found a way inside. We eventually found the stairs and climbed like 10 half flights of stairs to I guess the 6th floor. However, there was one more floor, the roof level, but the stairs in the hall we were in didn't lead up there. So we had to begin our search for the separate stairs to the roof level. As we were in a long, creepy corridor, there was suddenly a huge bang down the hall. We all aimed our flashlights down there, but the hallway was too long to truly see anything all the way down there. Apparently we weren't the only ones in this building. We tried to stay clear just in case it was security, so we went the opposite direction. We checked the whole hallway, then turned down some intersecting hallway area. I was in the back, so I would occasionally just glance behind me, just because it was a dark, abandoned building. A little after turning a corner, there was a crack in a piece of wood behind me. I turned since I was the only one to seem to notice it, and right there was someone peeking their head from around the corner, looking at us. But when I noticed them, they disappeared down the other hall. I called out, "Yo." I'm not really sure if it was directed to my friends, to the person I just saw, or both. My friend stopped and looked back. We went back to the corner where the halls intersected to look down that other hallway, but the guy I saw wasn't there. My friends didn't know whether I was joking or not, but at least now I knew we weren't alone in there. Eventually, we came to a part of the hall where 90% of the floor was missing, minus a very small strip still left intact. Rye insisted we were going over that, and volunteered to go first. After looking down the hole and realizing it wasn't that much of a drop, I was okay with it. It dropped into what appeared to be a bathroom, or at least what once was a bathroom. To cross, we pressed up the front of our shoes to the wall and grabbed onto a pipe that ran up the upper wall as support. I crossed last, and my 2 friends apparently didn't wait for me, because they disappeared down the hall as I called for them to wait. I then slowly started to cross the extremely narrow bridge between the 2 sides of the hole, when suddenly, I felt something grab the back of my shoe. At first I thought it was one of my friends messing with me, but that didn't make sense. They couldn't have gotten down there so quickly. I had no free hands to be holding my flashlight though, and my friends were already gone down the hall, so I was almost in complete darkness and couldn't see who or what was trying to pull me down into that hole. I screamed for my life, so loud it could probably be heard throughout the building. My friends came rushing back, and as light once again poured into the hole, the grip on my leg was released, and then there was a sound of running from down below. We didn't try to go down there and fight the guy. We didn't even look down there to see how he could have reached me or if he was even still there. I just forced my friends to come with me all the way down the stairs back to the first floor. But now we had another problem. We forgot how we got in. There was only that one window which wasn't barred up with steel, and we blocked it with wood. We were looking around in a hurry because of what happened. Nobody would play a joke like that. It felt like we were navigating a maze down there on the first floor looking for that stupid window. Every corner we turned, I was afraid we were going to see that face, peering from another corner. And it happened. Since I was now the one leading the three of us, I was the first to see it. At the end of the hall we were running down, there was that person hiding half his body behind the wall. This time, as opposed to last time, however, I could actually see that he was wearing a mask. Was it the same person who tried grabbing me through that hole? I don't know, but I still don't doubt it. We turned the other way and ran. We didn't stop running until we finally found that window we entered through. Climbing out was easier than climbing in, and by the time we got outside, it seemed most of the commotion going on outside was gone. Security seemed to have kicked most of the people off the premises. We could have found a security guard and warned them of a potential psychopath in the building, but that would risk us getting busted. So instead, we ran back through the woods to the car. The rest of the night, we hung out in a parking lot, and that was our 2016 Halloween. When I was 9 years old, my parents let me go trick-or-treating without them for the first time ever. I went with my best friend at the time, Mikey, who was also 9. We were to be back home by 9 o'clock the latest, though. I think it was getting close to that point when we were still out trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating was a little worse in our town because properties were so big, so it meant more walking for less candy. We came to one house, which sat on a corner and was isolated by a set of tall bushes. We rang the bell as usual. I still remember it all so clearly. You're about to find out just why that is, though. An older man opens the door, probably in his mid-50s, thin grayish hair and a mustache. He asks what our costumes are and talks down to us like we're 6 instead of 9. He asked us if we were with anyone else and seemed surprised that our parents weren't with us. Then he opened the door completely to reveal some kind of obstacle course tunnel he'd set up in his living room. It was made of cardboard boxes and Halloween decorations. Admittedly, it looked cool, and when he said in order to get our candy we'd have to make it through the obstacle course, it was very tempting. Mikey and I looked at one another and said okay. The man told us to come in, but he didn't look at us as he said it. Instead, he looked outside as he slowly shut the door. I crawled into that tunnel made out of boxes first, and Mikey followed after me. It was really dark inside of this tunnel since the man had only some dim orange Halloween lights on in the room. There were fake spiderwebs and other Halloween toys scattered throughout the box tunnel. It was actually really big and well put together because we struggled to find the way to the other end. But when we did, it led to a small room also lit up by orange Halloween lights. There was a note in this room pointing to a door saying "Candy down there." Mikey went to open the door, revealing stairs to the basement. There was more orange light down there. The man was nowhere to be seen though. Me and Mikey started making our way down the stairs, and when we got to the bottom, we saw nothing but a big, empty basement. Then, the door above us slammed shut. We went back up the stairs to try and open it, but it was locked. We didn't know what to do other than cry for help, but we stopped when we heard the doorbell ring upstairs. It rang repeatedly, actually. We listened by the basement door to hear anything. Then we heard what sounded like the front door opening, so we started screaming at the top of our lungs. Then there was a commotion outside the basement, like 2 men yelling at each other, before the door in front of us unlocked and opened, and a man and woman came up to us. The woman hugged us and told us to follow them out of the house. We followed the couple through the living room, passing the man in the corner of his room, standing over his freakish creation. The husband called the man a sick freak as we left the house. The couple took us to their house, where the husband called the cops and the wife stayed with us, asking questions like what the man said to get us inside of his house. Apparently, they'd seen us go into the man's house because they live across the street. The cops arrived, and there was an overwhelming amount of evidence for him to be arrested and tried. Of course, at the age of 9, we didn't understand the depth of the situation, but looking back now, we're all happy that those neighbors came to our rescue and justice was served that night. Halloween has been my least favorite holiday ever since I graduated college and got my own place. I hated the idea of strangers coming up to my house with their kids and asking for candy all day, but I dealt with it with a smile on my face. My property is big, but it doesn't have any fences, and times in the past I'd seen kids fight each other with silly string in my yard. Hell, I've even had kids teepee and silly string my house. One year though, late at night, past the hours where the bulk of trick-or-treaters were out, I got another ring from the doorbell, and my dog Mika started going crazy, barking as she had been doing all day. I opened the door to a person in a full-body gorilla costume, only the face of the gorilla was freaky looking. It was a costume made to look scary. He didn't say trick or treat, he just held up a small plastic bag that was filled with some candies, not a lot. Since it was close to the end of the night and I had a lot of candy left, I dumped a lot of it into his bag and waved goodbye. He didn't speak any words to me though, as he just stood on my stoop, slowly going through the bag, looking at the candies I just gave him. As I shut the door halfway, I stopped and continued to watch him as he looked up to me, but didn't say anything. I asked if he wanted more, but he didn't shake his head or respond or anything. He kept looking at me weirdly, so I just shut the door and locked it. I wasn't in the mood to be playing games. Plus, what he was doing was extremely unsettling. I went back downstairs to my den to continue watching the movie that I had on. That's when I heard something fall outside. The back door was right next to my couch, so I got back up and took like 5 steps to look outside. With the back patio light on, I could see a rake that had been leaning on a pole had fallen. Given how I left it sitting, it was weird for it to have fallen on its own. Being Halloween, I did feel the need to go out and investigate. I threw on my slides and went outside to pick up the rake first of all. It was not windy out at all, so it shouldn't have fallen on its own. Then I noticed the door to my shed was cracked open. I have a huge shed in my backyard that I store all of my outdoor equipment in. I went over to take a look inside. As big as the shed is, the lights haven't worked in there for years, so I had to use the light from my phone screen on full brightness as a flashlight of sorts. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I certainly wasn't expecting to find a gorilla mask sitting on a big box. I knew right away. The light from the phone screen only traveled so far, but I still dared walk further into the shed until I saw him in the corner. There was the person in the gorilla suit, only now he had his mask off. I stepped a little closer and realized he was facing the wall, just standing motionless. He was also not a kid, rather some old, terrifying-looking man. I didn't know if he heard or saw me yet, so I started backing away slowly. But even though I didn't make a sound, his head suddenly turned to face me. It nearly made me shit myself or have a heart attack. I ran back outside and slammed the shed door shut behind me. I then ran back to my back house door and heard the door to the shed open with a lot of force. I didn't look back, I just went inside and locked the door. Then, of course, I called the police to report a trespasser on my property. It figures, however, by the time the cops arrived, the guy in the gorilla suit was gone, mask and all. All they could do was assure me they'd be on the lookout for someone in a gorilla suit. Then they went on their way. After that, I didn't have much interest in finishing the movie, so I went upstairs and called it a night. That night in bed, I did wake up to Mika barking downstairs though, so I left my room to see where she was. She was in the den, by the back door, barking ferociously. I took a quick look outside, without letting Mika out with me, but I didn't see anyone, and the shed door was still shut. Still, I felt creeped out being out in that yard that night, so I hurried back in and brought Mika up to sleep in my room with me. I fell asleep, not without hearing Mika growling slightly occasionally, which freaked me out a lot. The next morning and ever since, life has been completely normal, and that was by far the scariest Halloween I've ever had.
When I was a kid, my parents would sometimes bring me down to my aunt and uncle's place to stay for the weekend. Mainly, I'd spend time playing with my two cousins who were around the same age as me. They lived on a small farm with plenty of open space, and we could run around doing pretty much whatever we wanted. If we thought we could get away with it, the three of us would sometimes cross over to the neighboring farm about half a mile away. It had been abandoned for decades, with a scattering of derelict buildings and other structures still standing on the property, just begging to be explored. This was of course a gold mine for three adventurous young boys such as ourselves, especially after my cousins told me stories about the deaths that took place in the house. It was pretty classic fare. Man goes crazy, axe murders his entire family, hangs himself, returns every night as an angry spirit looking for new victims. Good, grisly stuff. Even at that age, I knew they were probably making it up, or at least embellishing old rumors. But seeing as how the setting lent itself so well to such tales, I allowed myself to buy into it. One afternoon, we decided to play hide and seek. When it was my turn to hide, I ran off for a flimsy brown barn that had living quarters on top and climbed the stairs looking for a good spot. There was still furniture inside, and personal belongings lay scattered across the floor. I maneuvered over broken dishes, tattered clothes, and crumbling books, eventually coming to a small room with a closet. Jackpot. There were even long black dresses still hanging on the rod that I could hide behind. I stepped inside and managed to force shut the folding door. My only illumination was a slit of sunlight that shone through the crack in the door from a nearby window. I crouched down with knees tucked into chest and waited. Some time passed and there was still no sign of my seekers. I waited some more, debating if and when I should give myself up. After nearly an hour, this was starting to get boring. My head drooped. I awoke with a jerk. It was pitch black. Drowsy and confused, I forgot for a minute where I was or what I had been doing. As it came back to me, the realization that it was now nighttime and that I had been abandoned here filled me with sinking dread in the pit of my stomach. I tried to get up, but a sudden cramp in my calf kept me grounded. I squirmed about, waiting for it to pass, when I heard a door slamming shut downstairs, and instantly froze. One of my cousins? There was a brief period of silence, then footsteps at the bottom of the stairs. But not just footsteps, a thud too. After every other step. These weren't the footfalls of a child. They were slow, heavy, deliberate. I held my breath, praying they would go away. They did not. The noises continued to ascend. After another moment of silence, the walking resumed. This time along with a steady scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floorboards. The footsteps made their way through the debris and wandered aimlessly through the various rooms. I thought I could smell something faintly putrid. The constant scrape sent cold shivers coursing down my arms and back. My worst fears were realized when the steps reached the bedroom doorway. They got closer and closer and finally stopped directly in front of the closet door. I couldn't see a thing. After an agonizing pause, they continued on over to the other side of the room and out the doorway again. They faded away down the hallway. I waited for what seemed like an eternity. There were no more sounds now, and I was trying to build up enough courage to open the door and flee. 3 things happened simultaneously just then. I was bombarded with a smell I can only describe as fresh roadkill. I heard raspy breathing behind me in the dark closet, and I felt hot breath against the nape of my neck. That was enough for me to hurtle myself out from the confines of that nightmare space, relying on memory and scant moonlight to navigate through the darkened house. All the while, I heard footsteps chasing behind me, closing in with terrifying speed. It was a clumsy, torturous escape full of trips and bumps and blind stumbling. I never looked back, at least not until I had burst out the front door and into the country night. And when I did turn around, I saw absolutely nothing. There were no more footsteps and nobody was chasing me. That didn't stop me from running though, all the way back to my aunt and uncle's house. There was a police car in the driveway when I got back. My parents were there too, worried sick. Everybody demanded to know where I had been. Apparently, when my cousins still hadn't found me by evening, they'd returned home to tell their parents. Eventually, the police were called in and informed me that they had already scoured every building on the farm. The insinuation that I was lying about my whereabouts didn't go unnoticed. None of it made any sense. It wasn't until years later that one of my cousins filled in a final piece of the story. He and his brothers had spent hours searching for me like they said, but the part they didn't tell anyone was that they thought they spotted me in the window of the bedroom I was hiding in. And when they got closer, they saw that it wasn't me. A young boy neither of them recognized was smiling and waving down at them and gesturing for them to come upstairs. That's when they ran back home. All of this while I slept in the closet. A few months ago, I was over at my friend's house down the block. In fact, that's where most of my friends on the block actually are. I'm 16 years old right now, the second oldest out of the group of kids down the block. There's Alan, who's 17, Dan, who's in the same grade as me but a little younger, Johnny, who's 14, Daniela, who's also 14, Nick, who's 13, and Tom, who's only 12 years old. There's a big age gap between some of us, but we're really the only kids on the entire block. Me and Dan were the closest friends, and we kind of just met all the other kids who lived around the area while we hung out originally. It started to become our Friday night tradition to play a big game of Manhunt by Daniela and Nick's house. We don't live in a typical suburban neighborhood. Our area is a lot more spacious and overall has a lot less people and houses. And for that reason, there wasn't a lot going on in our area, but it also made the game that much more fun. It was our turn to hide first. I had 3 other kids on my team, but more notably, I had Dan on my team. Me and Dan both went next door to Mr. Nelson's old house. He was an old man who passed away a few years ago, and since then, no one has bought the house, leaving it vacant and a perfect property to add space for our game. Me and Dan went to the back section of the property by the lake, where we found a perfect hiding spot in some of his bushes. Dan, however, wanted to try something crazy and entered the vacant house through a sliding window, so I waited alone in the bushes. The goal of the game was to get back to Nick's house, which was always considered home base. A big part of the game is waiting. I was in those bushes for like 5 minutes, until I finally saw 2 kids from the other team entering the backyard looking for us. They were making a lot of noise, making their presence known. Once they left, the 2 of them continued even further down the block, giving us the perfect chance to run. I looked around at all the windows of the house, hoping Dan would be standing near one of them for me to wave him on. And when I looked up to one of the upstairs windows, I was relieved to see his head looking down to me. I waved him on, letting him know it's time to go, but he didn't move. Now I wasn't sure if he could see me. I went over to the window that he entered through, opened it, entered the house, and yelled up into the house calling Dan's name. I'm not even exaggerating when I say I felt like my heart stopped when I heard Dan's voice only a few feet away from me saying, "Dude, shh." I asked him how he got downstairs so quickly, and he just looked confused. He then told me he was sitting down here this whole time. At that same moment, we both looked up to the ceiling as there was a creaking sound coming from upstairs. We both hopped back out the window and ran back to Nick's house, where we called the game off. We went to ask Dan's dad if somebody had moved into the home, but he was positive that nobody had lived there for 3 years. Me, Alan, Dan, and Dan's dad all went over to the house, where we entered the same way we had earlier. Dan's dad was familiar with the house, as he used to be good friends with Mr. Nelson. He led the way upstairs and to the bathroom with a window I had seen someone standing at. He flicked on the lights, and besides a crumpled up reddish-brown blanket on the floor, the room was empty. We went through the entire house and found nothing. Dan's dad really didn't know what to do from there, so he just said if any of us, including him, ever see anything or anyone in that house, we would report it to the police immediately. It's been a few months already and we haven't seen anything since, but I know that somebody, besides Dan, was in that house that night.
Sean Great stalked northern Ohio between 2006 and 2016, slaughtering women after assaulting them. He's now on death row awaiting execution, thanks to one would-be victim's bravery. The following 911 call you're about to hear is of that would-be victim and is possibly one of the most tense 911 calls you'll ever hear. On September 13th, 2016, Ashland police received a phone call from an unknown woman who police referred to as Jane Doe, who whispered that she had been kidnapped and was tied up mere feet away from her sleeping abductor. She tried to describe the man who was holding her captive and the house she was in. The best she could manage was that it was next to the 4th Street laundromat.
What is the address to your emergency?
By the 4th Street laundromat.
What is it?
4th Street laundromat.
What's the problem?
I've been abducted.
Who abducted you?
Sean Green.
You said John Green?
Sean Great.
Where's he at now?
Asleep.
Where's he sleeping at?
In the bedroom.
In what bedroom?
There's 2 houses right by the laundry street. And it's in one of those houses.
What color's the house?
Yellow. Please hurry.
Is it an apartment?
No, it's a house.
Okay, does he own the house?
No, he broke into it.
Does anybody actually live there?
I think they've been abandoned.
Does he have a weapon?
He's got a taser.
Are you injured?
A little.
Where did he take you from?
My apartment. I was walking with him.
You were walking with him?
Mm-hmm.
Where were you walking to?
I've known him for like a month and a half.
Is there any way you can get out of the building?
I don't know without waking him, and I'm scared.
Is there a bathroom in the house?
Well, his bedroom is closed, and he made it so it would make noise.
And if you told him you had to go to the bathroom, he would do something to you?
Yeah, because he had me tied up.
So are you tied up now?
Well, yeah, but I kind of freed myself.
Is he in the same room with you?
Yes.
Are you bleeding from anywhere?
Not anymore. Oh, shit. Oh, shit, I woke him up.
You just set the phone down.
While the 911 dispatcher continued talking the caller through escaping, Jane accidentally knocked over her captor's taser, waking him. The line went dead briefly, and she was suddenly minutes away from being the 6th victim of the serial killer Sean Great. And by this point, the police knew they had to race if they wanted any chance of saving the helpless woman. Great sat up in his bed and stared at the floor, before laying back down again, not realizing that Jane was on the phone with the police.
Are you still there?
How much longer?
What?
How much longer?
Do you hear any officers outside?
No.
Okay, they're in the area. Can you get out of the house?
Locked.
It's locked. Are you at the door?
Yeah, I am.
She's at the door.
But
She's at the door on the right side of the house. She got out of the bedroom. Is there a window there?
yeah, I'm looking out of it. Tell them to come back.
She said
Hurry, hurry.
she said to hurry up and come back.
Yeah, they can see me if they
It's
come
locked.
to it.
The door is locked.
Come out, hurry up, get out of here. Where is he?
Bedroom sleeping.
Still sleeping?
Yeah.
Okay, they have her.
He went on armed.
Unarmed?
Yeah.
No, you can't be in there. Here, cover yourself up. Tell me what happened. What happened?
Their rescue of the woman and arrest of Great was heard on the call. Thankfully, the woman survived this ordeal, though likely not without having some lasting scarring effects on her. As a teenager growing up in Marion, Ohio, Sean Great was well liked, particularly by girls. He had a charm about him that would mask his inner rage, at least for a while. When he was 18, he was arrested for grabbing his then-girlfriend by the throat. A few years later, he was arrested for breaking into his 17-year-old girlfriend's home and choking her, and only 8 months later, he broke into the same girl's house again, this time slipping underneath her couch and hiding until he saw an opportunity to strike. This time he had a butcher knife in hand. But Great's charm and artificial friendliness allowed him to go on and have 3 children with 3 different women, but his inner anger would never lay dormant for long. His ex-wife, Amber Nicole Bowman, claims that Sean at one point said, "If I can't see my daughter, no one will." By his mid to late 20s, Great's behavior became more erratic. He would begin dating Christina Hildreth. The pair were happy and content in the beginning, but Great couldn't hide his true colors for long. Not only did he become violent, controlling, and jealous, he would also show signs of being cold and indifferent towards his confused girlfriend, and would eventually end up physically abusing her.
So was he violent with you?
Yes.
In what way?
He broke my hand, blacked my eye, strangled me, tied me up.
But his hostility would soon extend beyond just romantic partners, and even to friends, when he asked his friend for a loan, which was declined, and in response, he sent his friend a disturbing text saying, "Meet the other me." Eventually, Great would find himself living in Mansfield, hopping from woman to woman, and around this time, he met his first 2 victims, Rebecca Lisi and Candace Cunningham. Rebecca was a sex worker, and her body was found in March 2015. Her death was ruled an overdose originally, but Great later pleaded guilty to her murder. Candace Cunningham lived with Great in Mansfield before her disappearance in 2015. Police couldn't find her until the day of Great's arrest, when he led police to her body, which was lying behind a burned-down house in Richland County on the day of his arrest. Great managed to somehow become even more barbaric towards his next and final victim, Jane, who you heard in the phone call just before. Jane met Sean Great around her apartment complex, and he eventually gained her trust. That was when he exposed her to his true self. He trapped her in an abandoned house and forced her to endure days of torture and other unspeakable things while she was tied up. Great barely slept on the first night of his victim's capture, giving her no chance of escape. However, after another day of torture, Great eventually passed out. His phone was right next to him going off, but he was seemingly in a very deep sleep. So Jane took this opportunity as her likely last chance to escape alive, and she reached over his sleeping body as stealthily as she could to pick up the phone and dialed 911 while still partially bound. And that was the start of the 911 call. When police arrived at the property, they were met with more bodies than they'd expected. Great had been mercilessly killing the women who were unfortunate enough to trust him, and some of them were decomposing in the house he was squatting in. The 911 operator received a lot of hate and ridicule over her loud voice and constant seemingly unnecessary questions during the call, as many people believe she could have very easily led to Great being awoken, either by the sound of her voice or because of all the questions she was making Jane answer. Thankfully, things went the way they did, and this 911 call was a very fortunate story, as it got a monster off the streets who no doubt wouldn't have stopped doing what he was doing. The call you're about to hear was made by millionaire James Bob Ward, reporting that he had just shot his wife.
His tone throughout the call is very monotone, calm, and nonchalant considering the matter for which he's making the call. The real estate mogul claims he walked into his and his wife's room to turn in for the night and was shocked to find his allegedly depressed and intoxicated 51-year-old wife, Diane, holding his Magnum handgun. Bob says the weapon accidentally discharged while he was struggling to get it away from her before she could kill herself or him, or the both of them. This was the call.
No, what's the emergency?
I just shot my wife.
You just what?
I just shot my wife.
Where's your wife?
She's right here on the floor. Please send somebody at 5277 Iowa Country Club Drive.
Okay, what's going on there?
I just shot my wife.
You just shot your wife?
I shot my wife. Yes, please send somebody over.
Stay on my woman. Let me add the fire department. Don't hang up.
I will.
Where's the weapon at, sir?
Orange County Fire Rescue. The address of your emergency?
44.
5277 Iowa Country Club Drive.
On there.
I just shot my wife.
Okay, where's the weapon?
It's in
Is that where
the,
you found?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Where, is she breathing?
No, she's dead.
You know that for sure.
I think so, yes.
Okay, sir, where is the weapon?
It's in the nightstand next to the bed in the master bedroom. And I'll be glad to meet the officers at the front door.
Where is your wife, sir?
She's on the floor in the master bedroom.
How old is she?
Born in 1954.
Okay, you're sure she's not breathing or?
She's dead. She's done. I'm sorry.
Sir, did you purposely do this?
No,
Or was it an accident?
it was an accident.
How long ago did this happen, sir?
Probably 5 minutes ago. I'm on the front steps.
You're out on the front
There.
steps?
Yeah, I'm on the front steps.
Okay.
I'm leaving the front gate from the front steps. We'll go upstairs and we'll find Diane. Yeah, there's passing. You told me back up.
Did you see the deputy?
Yeah, I see lights, but they're somewhere back up. Ask them back up. Hey, guys, over here. Over here. Guys, over here. Hey, you're on the phone. I'm making the front stop. No, I got him on the phone. We're good.
We can hang up. We're with him. Okay.
Bob was charged with second-degree murder of Diane. He has always claimed the gun went off when he was trying to get it away from Diane, but prosecutors believe the two were arguing over financial problems, and that's why Bob shot her. Now it was up to a jury to decide, but to this day the question is, was Diane Ward's death really just a tragic accident, or did her husband Bob murder her in cold blood? Well, not too long ago, a significant discovery of a letter from the grave may finally answer the question that's confounded the justice system and haunted the Ward family since the day Diane died. Bob and Diane had it all, a happy 26-year-old marriage, 2 daughters, and enough money to own numerous luxurious estates in several states. Daughters Sarah and Mallory say they and their parents were a loving, tight-knit family. But eventually, Bob's real estate empire collapsed under the weight of the Great Recession, and even though Bob was facing bankruptcy, his daughters claimed he remained optimistic, but not Diane, who grew increasingly low-spirited over the prospect of losing the family fortune. Sarah said her mother vainly tried to ease her depression with booze and prescription drugs, and that she would turn into a different person far from the loving mom she knew, and completely out of control even in public. She said her mother was also directing all her anger and resentment at her father, after having to cut back on some of the luxuries the family grew used to, and Sarah says her father was like her mother's punching bag. Bob's defense attorneys painted Diane as a suicidal and unstable person, and in 2018, his defense attorneys produced new evidence. A suicide note written by Diane was found in the couple's Atlanta home. It was reportedly found by an estate sales professional in the closet in the master bedroom. She stated that she was on a ladder in a small closet in the bedroom when she noticed a pink notebook next to some hair rollers. She opened the notebook and found a note and some cards with Diane Ward printed on them. The alleged suicide note read, "Dear Mallory and Sarah, please know how much I love you. I don't know how it happened for me to end up like this. I want you to have wonderful lives and know that I will always be watching out for both of you. Take care of Daddy. I love you more than you will ever know. Take care of the dogs, they will need you. Defense attorneys claim that a former FBI handwriting expert could testify that he thinks the handwriting is indeed that of Diane Ward. So this all begs the question, is what Bob says true? Was his shooting of his wife an accident? But if this were the case, Bob's calm and seemingly unaffected tone over the phone with 911, and even during his police interrogation, wouldn't make much sense.
Then you're doing it rather
Any
than...
reading glasses anybody has?
Sure. I will grab...
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I have my pair.
Thank you.
I may
I have
have...
a folding pair, but I think they took them. Thank you.
Oh.
Like I said, I'm Detective Frost. I didn't get your name, your first name.
I go by Bob.
Okay.
But it's James Robert.
It would be a safe assumption that anyone who just accidentally murdered their wife would show any kind of remorse or regret, but Bob was calm and seemingly unaffected throughout. He's still in prison today. This last one has been circulating the internet for decades, and you've likely heard it before. In fact, I've included it in a video I privated many years ago. I'm sure some of you remember. But new information has arisen on this call recently.
This is Ruth Price of 3877.
What's the problem, ma'am?
Oh, there's some guy been checking the place out.
How?
Well, he went in the back. I have an apartment in the back, and he said he was looking for a guy. And he comes to my door, and
Yeah?
and said he's looking for an apartment. So I live alone, and I'm an old lady.
Mm-hmm. Where is he now, ma'am?
I don't have no idea.
For the longest time, this phone call was commonly just referred to as things like old woman murdered during 911 call. For a long time, people speculated that this call is just a hoax or a choreographed recording for 911 operator training. Eventually, though, the woman's name was revealed to be Ruth Price, and it was learned that the call was in fact real. However, the internet was still having a hard time gathering any further information on this Ruth Price woman, or what her fate was after the phone call. The unfortunate assumption that she was murdered shortly after this call was always the go-to assumption. At the beginning of the call, Ruth begins to give her address as 3877, but is cut off by the 911 operator. During this 911 call, Ruth presents herself as an elderly woman who's concerned about a man who knocks on her door saying he's looking for an apartment. Ruth pauses after giving this information. Then you hear a blood-curdling scream, and Ruth says something about not being able to breathe. Recently, though, information as to who this Ruth Price woman was finally surfaced. Ruth Mildred Starr was born in Pueblo, Colorado on December 7, 1913. Ruth went to Central High School in Pueblo, Colorado, and this was her yearbook photo. Ruth's obituary was recently found, which shows that she died in 1994 in the San Diego Union-Tribune. Ruth was also mentioned in a newspaper section called Assaults on November 3, 1980 in the San Diego Evening Tribune. In this newspaper clipping, it says Ruth M. Price was assaulted on the 3800 block of 35th Street.
This is Ruth Price of 3877.
This newspaper clipping which you see here fits the Ruth Price 911 call perfectly. It wasn't a hoax, and it wasn't a 911 training call. That blood-curdling scream was unfortunately very real. But fortunately, even in Ruth's old age, she managed to fight off her attacker and live for another 14 years. What seems like a realistic possibility now is that this call was used to shock trainees for 911 call taking because of how blood-curdling and disturbing her panic screaming was, and thus was born the legend of an old woman brutally murdered while on the phone with 911. At least this story had a much happier ending than originally thought. When I was 14 years old, I lived with my mom, dad, 2 brothers, and my sister in a rural town in Florida. Overall, I miss living in Florida, but the one thing I don't miss was the constant rain. On one particular stormy Saturday night, where the thunder was so loud it shook the whole house, me and my 2 brothers had nothing to do. My sister was out at a friend's house. Me and my 2 brothers decided to play some video games to pass the time. It was only 8 o'clock after all. I remember we were playing some weird PS2 game where all the WWE wrestlers were driving cars and shooting at each other. I don't remember the name, but I remember the exact moment the power went out. I was about to kill my brother in the game when the room went completely dark and the sound of something popping from outside echoed into the room. We assumed a fuse had blown outside on one of the power lines. We went to call for our dad, who was already getting his rain jacket on to go outside and check. Our house has 2 fuse boxes, one outside attached to the telephone pole on our lawn, and one inside. He asked me to go outside with him to aim a flashlight at the fuse box. When we were outside, he opened up the fuse box and began flicking around the different switches, hoping to reset something. He tried every switch, but the power didn't seem to come back on. He told me to wait there and to keep flicking switches while he went inside to do the same thing with the indoor fuse box. The rain was coming down hard. I just wanted to go inside as soon as possible. As I had the flashlight in my hand aimed into the fuse box, even through the sound of rain pounding down on the ground, I thought I heard something come from the woods behind our house, like a giant log cracking. I aimed the flashlight into the woods, and for maybe half a second, I thought I saw an arm reaching around from behind a tree. But as soon as the light exposed it, the arm pulled away behind the tree. I shut the fuse box, ran up the front patio and into the house. I ran to my dad, who was tampering with the switches inside the fuse box in the closet. He entertained my claim, but he didn't seem to take what I said very seriously. He followed me outside around back, where I aimed the flashlight into the woods, the same spot I saw the arm. My dad took the flashlight from me and made his way into the woods. I stayed by the back patio in total darkness. Pretty soon my dad went so deep into the woods that I couldn't see the flashlight anymore. Growing nervous, I inched my way closer to the woods, repeatedly calling out for my dad, until I found myself walking into the woods. It was hard to even hear myself think over the sound of rain pouring down on the leaves above, but I did suddenly hear footsteps not too far away. Once again, I called out for my dad, and I heard him answer. This made me panic. Why, you may be wondering? Because my dad's voice came from a completely different direction than the footsteps. I ran in the direction of my dad's voice and eventually found him walking back to the house. Out of breath, I barely managed to tell him about the footsteps over in the other direction. He told me to go back inside and he'll continue to look around, and so I went inside and locked the door. Me, my brothers, and my mom all waited by the back door, expecting to see him come out of the woods any second. Eventually, we heard someone at the front door trying to open the locked door. I went over, expecting it to be my dad, but my mom stopped me and looked through the peephole. Then she screamed. She ushered me away from the door and told all of us to go upstairs, and at that same moment, my dad came back into the house through the back door. I didn't see the rest of what happened, but I heard my dad yelling at someone outside. When he came back in, he told all of us he saw someone running into the woods. I knew he was taking this seriously now. We thought it would end there, but the next morning, we found that the basement window had been smashed, and there were muddy footprints all over the basement carpet. A large wad of cash that was sitting on the basement bar was stolen, along with a few antique decorations that held some value. The scary part was that the muddy footsteps went up the stairs, but stopped there. Our basement door had a very heavy-duty lock, which may be the only thing that stopped this man from exploring the rest of our house, possibly even our bedrooms. It's been a pretty rough couple of nights over here in Midwest. Flood warnings are replaced with thunderstorm watches. Thunderstorm watches are followed up by tornado warnings, and even sirens add a nice touch to this surreal nightly experience. I used to enjoy a good thunderstorm.
You get yourself comfortable on a couch, grab an extra pillow with a blanket, cuddle up, and enjoy the show of grace and might. Lightning bolts ripping through the sky, illuminating clouds, houses, and tree lines. The sound wave, coming with a tad of delay, shaking the window frames and sending a strange tingle through your body. Nature is a powerful force, and it was majestic to see it in action. Until tonight. The forecast was promising a late-night thunderstorm, so I was caught by surprise when I started seeing flashes outside around midnight. Since I wasn't prepared for it, I tried to quickly finish up the Orange is the New Black episode and get myself to the couch. When I got my headphones off, I realized why the flashes seemed so odd at first. There was no sound to follow them. I mean, if the lightning is in the clouds or pretty far away, then yeah, I guess the sound could be missing. But the flashes seemed so close. I decided to check out the sky of the kitchen window. There's a pair of large glass panels that give you a good wide-angle view to the outside. To keep my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I stayed away from flipping the switches on and traveled through the house relying on my memory. The moonless darkness of outside gives you that eerie feeling, even if you are inside of the safe walls of your house. But those are just the feelings, nothing else. If it wasn't for the glass, the pitch-black darkness of both sides made me feel like the safe walls surrounding me no longer exist, and that feel of safety was slowly crawling away. But the walls did shatter when I glanced up high into the sky, and my eyes met the twinkly stars staring back at me. There were no clouds. There was no thunderstorm with lightning. No, there wasn't. But the next flash, right from the other side of the window pane, did reveal that there was someone 5 feet away from me, and nothing but a thin glass sheet was separating us apart. In the year 2009, I was spending a weekend with my uncle on his ranch when my parents were renovating the new house we had just bought. It was my second night there, a Saturday, and it happened to be during one of the biggest thunderstorms of the year. I'd say there were at least 3 crashes of thunder and lightning per minute. And we were in the heart of the storm, because the thunder would crash not even a second after the lightning would. I always enjoyed listening to storms while laying in bed, so I stayed up a little later watching TV, just enjoying the ambiance. After the movie I was watching finally ended, I turned off the TV and tried to fall asleep. As I heard the lightning strike from outside, I could have sworn I heard some kind of metallic thud coming from outside at the same time. I didn't pay it too much mind. 20 seconds later, I could have sworn I heard it again. A very distinct metallic thud coming from outside to match the timing of the lightning. I really don't mean to make this sound like a cliche horror story, but my uncle really is a kind of creepy guy, and I was never close with him even remotely. So for that reason, I didn't feel right going to wake him up. I just tried to forget about it. Now I was getting concerned. What the hell could that be? After the 3rd time, I finally got out of bed and walked over to the window of the guest bedroom. The water pouring down on the window made it extra hard to see what was out there in the dark fields. A flash of lightning momentarily lit up the property, but I couldn't see anything. However, once again, the sound of a metal hit accompanied it. The sound was so close now, it sounded like it was coming from the left of the window at a blind spot. I was going to do something I knew my uncle wouldn't be happy about. It would be a bit messy, but I was going to open the window and peer outside to see if I could see what the sound was. I unhooked the window lock and slid it up, and immediately the wind of the storm blew drops of rain into the room and onto me. I stuck my head out the window and looked to the left, and at that very moment, lightning lit up the property once again, and I could see a person dressed in all black crouched down by the outside basement door with his hand raised in the air. And before the sky went dark, I caught the briefest glimpse of what the sound was coming from. The person was bashing at the basement door lock. I pulled my head in and quietly shut the window, making sure to lock it. I was in a panic. I feared he might have seen or heard me. I ran back to bed and pretended to be asleep, facing away from the window. Lightning crashed once again, but this time there was no metallic thud. My heart must have dropped as I realized this. I just stayed put in bed for the longest time, hoping whoever was out there would go away. After maybe 3 more lightning crashes without any thuds accompanying them, I thought it would be safe to go tell my uncle. I turned to face the window and screamed. There was a figure, clear as day, standing at the window, looking in at me. I screamed as loud as I could and ran straight to my uncle's room. He went outside with his hunting rifle with nothing on but his pajamas, not even socks. He ran around the entire property yelling like a madman, but didn't find anyone. The next morning, we were able to better see the marks on the basement door lock. It was almost bashed open. Maybe 3 or 4 more good hits would have done it, according to my uncle. He was proud of me for picking up on it. Luckily, I was out of there that same day. My uncle hasn't told us of any incidents since, so I think he's been okay. Not that we talked to him much at all. I'm grateful I stayed up a little later that night watching that movie, because I may have just stopped a robbery, or possibly much worse.
I moved to South Dakota about 5 years ago. It was the first time I'd ever lived alone, and honestly, it was long overdue. My parents had been on my case for years about getting out of the house, and I finally caved. I'm not exactly a social butterfly, so the idea of living somewhere secluded actually appealed to me. The house I found was in one of the snowier parts of the state, tucked away on a stretch of land where the nearest neighbor was a solid walk away. That was fine by me. For the most part, that's exactly what I got. The first few years were uneventful in the best way possible. I kept to myself, went to work, came home, and didn't bother anyone. I never introduced myself to any of the neighbors, partly because I'm just not that kind of person, and partly because there wasn't much of a compelling reason to do so. The houses out there are so spread apart that you could go weeks without seeing another soul. Everything changed one afternoon in early February. I was at work when the snow started coming down. At first, it was nothing unusual, but within an hour, it had escalated into something else entirely. The wind picked up, visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the roads started getting dangerous. My boss eventually told everyone to head home before conditions got any worse. I drive a lifted truck, so I wasn't too worried about making it back. I've driven through plenty of bad weather before, and the truck has always handled it well. Still, there were certain sections of the drive that had me a little concerned. By the time I finally pulled into my driveway, I was just relieved to be home, but when I went to unlock my front door, I realized it was frozen solid. I stood there for a second, processing what was happening, then tried again, but it wouldn't budge. I didn't have a lighter on me or anything else that could generate enough heat to thaw the mechanism. I tried breathing on it, cupping my hands around it, even banging on it a few times out of frustration. None of it worked. I walked back to my truck and sat there, not sure what to do. The heater was blasting, and I told myself I'd just wait out the storm. Maybe it would die down in an hour or two, and I could figure something out. But as I sat there watching through the windshield, the snow only seemed to fall harder. After maybe 10 minutes, I realized I was making a mistake. The longer I waited, the worse things were going to get. My truck was already half buried, and even with the lift, I doubted I'd be able to get back out of the driveway. So now, driving wasn't even an option anymore. I didn't have anyone to call. I didn't know any of my neighbors, and my parents were hours away. I tried to drive the truck out of there, but like I suspected, it was stuck. My only real option was to walk to one of the neighboring houses and ask for help. I hated the idea of it, showing up at some stranger's door asking them to take me in, but I didn't have another choice. Staying in my truck all night wasn't going to work. The gas would eventually run out, and then I'd be sitting in a freezing metal box in the middle of a blizzard. The closest house was still pretty far away, probably a quarter mile or so. By the time I reached it, I was shivering uncontrollably. It was a tiny one-story house, and even through the blowing snow, I could tell it was in rough shape. I knocked on the front door as loud as I could. I waited for a good minute, and I was just about to turn away and try the next house, when the door swung open so violently I actually took a step back. The man standing there looked around 50 years old with a very nondescript face. He looked at me for a second without saying anything, then introduced himself as Joe. I explained my situation and he nodded slowly, stepping aside to let me in. I should have felt relieved, but something about him felt off from the start. It was hard to pinpoint at first. The house was warm, which was all I really cared about in the moment. He offered me a seat on the couch and sat across from me in a worn-out armchair. We made small talk for a few minutes, or at least I tried to. He answered my questions, but his attention seemed to be somewhere else entirely. His eyes kept darting around the room, from me to the floor to the ceiling to somewhere over his shoulder. It was like he couldn't focus on any one thing for more than a few seconds. At first, I thought maybe he was just nervous about having a stranger in his house. That would have been understandable, but the longer we sat there, the more unsettled I became. He couldn't focus on the conversation either. He'd be mid-sentence and then just trail off, staring at a spot in the wall like he was looking through it. I decided I wanted as little interaction with this guy as possible. I told him I was exhausted and asked if I could just get some sleep. He seemed almost relieved by the suggestion and pointed to the couch, saying I could crash there for the night. I asked if we could turn out the light, and he flicked off the lamp without argument. But he didn't leave. He just stood there in the doorway for what felt like a full minute, not saying anything, not even moving. I lay on the couch with my eyes half closed, trying to look like I was already drifting off. Eventually, after this long, uncomfortable pause, he finally receded down the hallway toward what I assumed was his bedroom. I really did try to sleep. I was exhausted, and the couch was actually more comfortable than I expected. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Every time I closed my eyes, I started to drift off and then jolt awake, convinced I heard something. About an hour in, I actually did start hearing things. It took me a few seconds to realize that the thumping and scraping sounds were coming from above me. At first, I told myself it was just snow shifting on the roof. That happens all the time in heavy storms. But these sounds were different, somehow. That didn't make any sense, though. The house was one story. There was no upstairs floor for anyone to be walking around on. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself there was a rational explanation. The sounds continued for several minutes, sporadic but persistent. And then, without warning, there was a thump that was considerably louder than all the previous ones. It was so sudden and so forceful that I shot upright on the couch, and as soon as I sat up, I saw him. Joe was standing in the doorway again. He must have been there for a while, just watching me in the dark, because I hadn't heard him come back. My skin started feeling itchy. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could get a word out, he literally charged at me. He jumped over the back of the couch and tackled me to the floor. The next few seconds were pure chaos. We rolled around on the carpet, and I realized he was trying to put me in a chokehold. He was stronger than he looked, and for a moment, I thought I wasn't going to be able to get him off. I kept resisting, and he started yelling. He screamed at me to stop fighting. He kept referencing this her, like I was supposed to know what he was talking about. He said she was lonely, and something about how she would find me good company. I wasn't thinking about that, though. I was fighting for my life. I finally managed to get enough leverage to shove him off me. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed my coat, and ran for the front door. I didn't even put my coat on. I was too terrified to waste any more time. Behind me, I heard that crazy fuck scream something. I'm pretty sure he said, "She's not gonna be happy," or some insane shit along those lines. I ran and didn't stop until I reached the next house. The family who answered the door were normal people, a husband and wife from the looks of it. They took one look at me and pulled me inside without asking questions. I slept on their couch that night. The next morning, I woke up to the wife, who introduced herself as Kathy. She was making everyone coffee. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, and I told them what happened. As soon as I described the house, the husband, whose name was Brandon, interrupted me. He asked if it was Joe. I said yes, and he just nodded, like he wasn't surprised at all. He told me that Joe had been a problem in the area for years, but then he told me something that gave my skin that itchy feeling again. About a decade earlier, Joe's wife had disappeared. There was never any official investigation. Nothing was ever proven, but most people in the area suspected he killed her. The body was never found. I immediately connected the dots, but kept my mouth shut for whatever reason. I still have no idea why I didn't speak up. I did end up reporting my experience to the police, but I don't think they ever did anything to deal with it. The scariest part is that I still live in the same house 3 years later. Nothing has happened since that night in the blizzard, but I'd be lying if I said I don't get a weird feeling every time I drive past Joe's house. The one silver lining to all of this is that I got close with the family who took me in that night, but I always get a weird feeling every time I go over there because it reminds me of Joe and whatever god-awful thing he's done to his wife. This happened last winter during one of the worst blizzards I can remember. I'm 27 and live alone in a small rental house in upstate New York. I work remotely in finance, which sounds fancier than it is. Mostly, I just sit at my desk and stare at spreadsheets all day. The point is, I rarely have a reason to leave the house during the week. Some weeks, I don't leave at all. Anyway, the local news has been hyping up this blizzard for days. You know how they get. Every storm is potentially historic or life-threatening, until it dumps 3 inches and everyone moves on. But this one actually looks serious. The weather alerts were telling people to stay off the roads unless absolutely necessary, stock up on essentials, all that. So I went grocery shopping that morning, grabbing enough food to last me through the weekend, and then I settled in for what I assumed would be a boring few days of working from home. The snow started in the mid-afternoon, and by around 8 p.m., I could barely see past my front porch. I spend most of the evening on my couch, half watching TV and half listening to the wind howl outside. It's a specific kind of sound, wind during a blizzard, not like a summer storm where it comes and goes. This was constant, like the house was inside a tunnel. At around 10:30, I heard a new sound. It was kind of like a loud thud, followed by this dragging sound, sort of like something heavy being pulled across wood. I figured a tree branch had come down. There are a few old oaks near my driveway, and with all that snow and wind, it wouldn't be surprising if one of them dropped a limb. About 15 minutes later, though, I heard a car horn. It wasn't a normal honk. It was weak and intermittent, almost like someone had tapped the horn on accident. I went to my front window and looked out. There was a vehicle stopped near the end of my driveway. I could see its headlights cutting through the snow, but that was about it. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting to see if anyone could get out, but I couldn't make out any movement. With the storm the way it was, I couldn't even tell what kind of car it was. My first thought was that someone had slid off the road. It happens out there, especially in weather like that. It sounds callous, but I wasn't about to trudge out into a blizzard to check on a stranger, not when I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. I went back to the couch and tried to focus on something else. At around 11, I heard knocking at my front door. I didn't open the door. Instead, I walked over and called out, asking who was there. A man's voice answered. He said his car was stuck and he needed to come inside to warm up and use a phone. His voice sounded strained, like he was out of breath. Part of me felt guilty. If this guy really had been walking through that storm, he probably was freezing. But another part of me still wasn't fully ready to just open my door to a stranger in the middle of the night. Instead of opening the door fully, I cracked it, making sure to keep the security chain locked. The man on my porch was covered in snow, like to a laughable extent. It was caked on his jacket, his shoulders, his hair. He was shorter than me, and he was visibly shivering. He said his phone had died and that he'd been walking for some time, trying to find a house with lights on. I was just about to open the door when I noticed his boots. I don't know what made me look down, but I did. And here's the thing. His boots were clean. Like, clean and dry, too. If this guy had really been walking through a blizzard for any length of time, his boots should have been caked with snow and ice as well. Hell, mine get like that just walking to my car. I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. I told him again that I would call for help and make sure someone came for him. He asked me to be let in again, more firmly this time. I didn't respond. I just closed the door and locked it. I could hear him say something on the other side, but I was already walking to get my phone. I called 911 and explained the situation. While I was on the line with the operator, I heard footsteps move from my porch to the side of my house, toward the back. The operator told me to stay inside and keep all the doors locked. She said police were being dispatched, but warned me that response times might be delayed because of the weather. I moved to a side window and peeked out, not wanting him to see me. The man was standing near the corner of my house, maybe 15 feet away. He wasn't moving, he was just standing there looking up at the windows. A few minutes later, I heard banging on my back door. Like someone was trying to break through. The whole door was shaking in its frame. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and retreated to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me and stood a few feet from the door. The banging stopped after maybe a minute. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours, but it was probably closer to 20 minutes. At some point, I heard the car horn again, the same one from earlier, but this time it was one long, continuous honk. Luckily, the police arrived shortly after that. They found a vehicle partially buried in a snowbank, but it was further down the road than where I'd seen the headlights. The engine was cold when they checked it, not warm like it would have been if someone had recently been driving it. Here's the part that still gets me. The officers told me there were no footprints leading from the vehicle to my house. Apparently the snow was undisturbed between the car and my property. There were footsteps leading down my driveway and round my house, but they stopped at the driveway like someone had been driving a separate car. The police searched the area but didn't find anyone. The next morning, after the storm had passed and the sun was out, I went outside to look around. To my horror, there were muddy handprints on the exterior of my bedroom window, which definitely hadn't been there when the police searched the property. It was like the person had come back after they had left, or had been hiding and never left in the first place. A few days later, I found out that another house about half a mile away had been broken into during the storm. The homeowner wasn't there at the time, so no one was hurt, but the strange part was that nothing was reported stolen. Whoever broke in didn't take anything. Why anyone would break into a house during a blizzard and not even steal anything is beyond me. It's almost like whoever did wasn't trying to rob the place, but do something else. I know the whole incident doesn't sound that scary, but I can't help but feel like whoever was trying to get into my house, probably the same person that broke into the other house, was there to do something sinister. I'm just glad I didn't open my door. This happened several years ago now. I have told maybe 3 people about it, my wife, my brother, and one close friend who I knew wouldn't think I was losing my mind. I'm telling it here because I still don't have an explanation, and at this point, I've accepted that I probably never will. I'm 34, and I live in British Columbia. For most of my 20s, I was a professional skier, alpine racing mostly. I competed nationally for about 6 years before my body started telling me it was time to stop. Nothing dramatic like a career-ending injury or anything, just the accumulation of wear and tear that happens when you've been throwing yourself down mountains since you were a kid. I stepped away from competition when I was 26, which felt like the right call at the time and still does. But retiring from competitive skiing doesn't mean you stop skiing. If anything, it freed me up to do the kind of skiing I actually loved, backcountry stuff away from the resorts and crowds. I say all this not to brag, but to establish that I knew what I was doing out there. I was avalanche trained, certified in wilderness first aid, and familiar with every protocol you're supposed to follow when you're skiing alone in remote terrain. I'd done dozens of solo trips in the backcountry without incident. The plan that day was simple. I was going to hit a remote range a few hours north of where I lived, a spot I'd skied before, actually. The weather forecast was calling for light snowfall, maybe a few inches, but nothing that would prevent a day trip. I checked the avalanche conditions the night before and again that morning. Everything looked manageable. I got to the mountain just after sunrise, strapped on my gear, and started skidding uphill. The snowfall started picking up while I was climbing, which wasn't unusual, but the wind had changed too. It was coming from a different direction than the forecast had predicted, and it was stronger than it should have been. Visibility was also dropping much faster than I was comfortable with. The smart move would have been to just turn around immediately, but I was already at the top of a line I'd been looking forward to all week. I told myself just one run and then I'd call it early. I've replayed that decision 1,000 times since then, and before you say it, yes, I know it was stupid. I know experienced people die all the time in the backcountry because they make exactly the kind of call I made that day. I knew it then too, but I did it anyway. The descent started fine. The pitch was manageable, and I was skiing conservatively just to be extra safe. About 2/3 of the way down the mountain, though, the worst possible thing happened. If you've never been caught in an avalanche, it's hard to describe how fast it happens. 1 second you're in control, the next you're just not. It's not the same thing as wiping out or even catching an edge. The snow moves, and you have no choice but to move with it. I got lucky. The avalanche wasn't big, probably a class 2, which was enough to knock me off my skis, but not enough to bury me. I tumbled maybe 30 or 40 yards before I slammed into something solid. Slammed as in instant deceleration. I don't even know what it was, rocks probably, or maybe a tree buried under the snowpack, but all I remember in that moment was the feeling in my left leg. I remember just lying there, trying to convince myself everything was alright, but it wasn't. My skis had released, that was good, that's what they were supposed to do, but one of them had tumbled further downhill, and I had no idea where it ended up. I tried to stand and immediately collapsed. The pain in my leg was unimaginable. I can't even begin to describe it. I managed to get myself into a sitting position and took stock of the situation. The snow was still seemingly getting worse too, which meant I was likely in the opening moments of a blizzard. But the worst part was obviously my leg. I couldn't put much weight on it, which meant I couldn't ski out even if I found my other ski. My options were limited. I had 3 choices. 2 of them were suicide, and the third wasn't much better. I could stay where I was and hope someone came looking for me, but only one person knew where I was that day, and he wouldn't have assumed something was wrong for at least a few hours. I could try to dig and wait out the storm, but I didn't have the supplies for an overnight and the temperature was dropping. Or I could start moving, painfully and slowly, to try and cover as much ground as possible before conditions got even worse. I chose to move. It's not like I had much of a choice. I secured what was left of my gear and started limping downhill, using the one pole that was miraculously still in my hand as a makeshift crutch. Every step sent pain shooting through my leg, but I had to keep moving. As for the snow, my prediction turned out to be correct. It only got worse, and at that point it was falling so heavily that I could barely see. I was ignoring the pain in my leg, focusing on moving as fast as I could and wondering whether I was going to die out there, when I heard something behind me. At first, I thought the adrenaline was finally getting to my head and overwhelming my brain. That was genuinely my first thought, that I was becoming delirious in my final moments before passing out. But I turned around anyway, and what I saw confirmed that I was hallucinating. There was another skier moving downhill toward me. I can't describe it, but seeing him emerging from the snow filled me with an emotion that has no word. I was skeptical as to whether what I was seeing was even real, simultaneously relieved and terrified that there was another person out there, and something else. It was fear, but for what, I didn't know. He reached me within a few minutes. He was alone and backcountry equipped like me. He pulled off his helmet to readjust his goggles and asked if I was hurt, and I told him what happened. Without wasting a second, he moved up to my side and let me put my arm around his shoulder. We started moving together. Like I said before, I felt something that I couldn't explain. There was something beyond the adrenaline, pain, relief, and confusion. It didn't feel like a normal interaction. It felt like he hadn't stumbled upon me by accident, as crazy as that sounds. We talked about the basic stuff, most of which I don't remember, but there was one thing he said that stayed with me for whatever reason. He told me he hadn't used his legs in a long time, and it was nice to get back on solid ground. I didn't really know what he meant by that. I assumed he was talking in some ski jargon I didn't know. I laughed and we kept going. At one point, I had to stop. I remember this exact moment like it was yesterday. I leaned against a tree and closed my eyes for literally 4 seconds, and when I opened them, he was gone. There was no one there, but unless he buried himself in the snow, there was really nowhere for anyone to go either. I yelled for him, what else was I gonna do? But no one called back. I started looking at the snow in the immediate area, thinking maybe he had gotten buried. Nothing. It gets worse though. There were no tracks in the snow other than my own. I started freaking out. He'd been right there, right next to me, supporting half my weight for what must have been like an hour, but there was nothing. I started feeling dizzy, like someone had just punched me in the gut. and the feeling I had been feeling earlier came back. The rational part of my brain was insisting there had to be an explanation. Could I have been more disoriented than I thought? Maybe the snow had filled in his tracks faster than mine. Or maybe I had hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe I was already dead. I didn't have time to figure it out. The storm wasn't going to wait for me to process what had happened. I don't know how I made it back to my car. The last mile or so was such a blur. Just pain and cold and the stubborn refusal to stop moving. But I did eventually make it. I drove myself to the hospital and finally got some good news. The doctor told me my leg was severely sprained but not broken. They told me I got incredibly lucky. Fast forward to a few days later and I'm still recovering at home, but I can't stop thinking about one thing. That other skier, where he'd come from, where he'd gone, why there hadn't been any tracks. I kept telling myself I'd figure it out eventually, but I think that was mostly wish casting. I was combing through some local skier-centric website, something I do often, and that's when I stumbled upon something terrifying. It was a story about a fatal backcountry skiing incident, a man who'd been lost in a storm a few weeks prior. It had happened on the same mountain range, and authorities hadn't been able to find a body. The worst had been assumed. There were no photographs of the man on the article, and when I searched up his name, I didn't find any Facebook or Instagram profiles or anything of the nature. So I can't compare the man I saw on the mountain to the man in the article, but it's still a chilling coincidence nonetheless. I choose to believe the shock and hypothermia were causing me to hallucinate and my memory playing tricks on me. Maybe my brain constructed something to convince me that I wasn't alone on the mountain, but I remember his shoulder under my arm. I remember feeling him helping me down the mountain. There's no way I could have moved that fast by myself. I still ski, but I haven't gone alone since then. I still have no idea what helped me off that mountain. When I first came to the United States, I was 20 years old and working as an au pair. I didn't have much experience, but I was eager, also very nervous. I'd grown up in a small town in France and hadn't ever spent time away from home, let alone across an ocean. My English still needed work, but I was confident enough to get by. I expected it to be a good year, a new adventure, a cultural exchange, something I'd tell my friends about when I went home. I was matched with the Joseph family. I don't want to name the exact town for privacy reasons, but it was an upper middle class neighborhood. Quiet streets, nice houses, big backyards, the kind of place you'd expect to find well-behaved kids, PTA moms, and dads who worked non-stop. I remember being so relieved when I first arrived. I thought this would be easy. Nothing bad happens in places like this. The Josephs had 2 boys, Brock and Brandon. Brock, the older one, was 12. He was a pretty typical kid, kind of lazy, sometimes rude, but harmless overall. He made jokes, liked his Xbox, and mostly stayed out of trouble. Brandon, though, was different. He was 9 and already had this coldness to him. I don't know how else to describe it. There was something off. I think it's likely he had some kind of social disorder. When I first met him, he just stared at me without saying a word. Not shy or embarrassed, just staring like he was studying me. After a few seconds, he smiled and asked, "Are you the maid?" I laughed awkwardly and said I was going to help look after him and his brother for the year. He didn't laugh with me, he just kept watching. It didn't take long to realize Brandon wasn't like the other kids. My host parents warned me that he was difficult. They said he had a bit of an attitude, but that was the understatement of the century. Brandon didn't just have an attitude, he was mean. And I don't mean the usual bratty stuff like teasing his brother or refusing to eat what he was served. It was worse than that. He lied constantly, about everything. He once told his teacher that Brock tried to choke him in the kitchen, which never happened. He told a neighbor that his parents locked him in a closet at night. He even told me that the last au pair ran away because of him, and that she was never seen again. When I tried to scold him for it, he narrowed his eyes and said, "Don't tell me what to do." Everything was manageable for me, even at that point, but I do admit that I was a little frightened of him. Things only got worse from there. One night, about 2 months in, I pulled back my sheets and froze. There were thumbtacks scattered all over my mattress. I just stared for a second. Dozens, maybe 100 of them, were pointing upwards, waiting for me to lie down. My heart started racing. The mattress cover had tiny punctures everywhere. I stood there in fear, realizing how close I'd come to lying on them. Brandon had been spying on me earlier that day. I'd caught him peeking through a crack in the door when I was folding clothes. I didn't think much of it at the time, just assumed he was being nosy. But after seeing all those thumbtacks, I wasn't so sure. I was honestly so scared. I didn't want to tell his parents, afraid that they'd send me back to France, so I cleaned up the mess and kept it to myself. After that, things became more and more strange. Brandon started following me around the house. I'd catch him peeking around corners, watching me from the doorways. Sometimes when I was cooking or reading, I'd look up to find him sitting across the room, staring without blinking. I never said anything. I must admit, I tried to avoid him as much as I could out of fear. One afternoon, I was watering flowers in the garden when I smelled something off. A sharp, sour odor, like something rotting. I traced it to a corner of the yard where the soil looked freshly disturbed. I was curious, so I grabbed one of those little garden shovels and started poking at the soil. When I saw what was there, I nearly screamed. There were 3 dead rabbits buried there. Their bodies were twisted and cut in several places. One had its legs tied together with string. I ran inside to tell my host parents. Mr. and Mrs. Joseph looked concerned at first, until they pulled Brendan aside to ask him about it. He gave an innocent look and said it wasn't him. And that was it. They believed him. Mrs. Joseph said it was probably one of the neighborhood kids and told Brendan to go back inside. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked after that. A week later, I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise in my room. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow near my bed. It was Brandon. He was standing there, holding something. I blinked a few times and realized what it was. A kitchen knife. I screamed as loud as I could. By the time the parents came rushing in, the knife was gone. Brandon had shoved it onto the bed. He convinced them that he'd been sleepwalking. Mrs. Joseph gave me an annoyed look, as if to say, "Why are you making such a fuss?" I pointed to the knife handle sticking out from under the bed and pleaded with them to believe me. Mr. Joseph knelt down, pulled it out, and showed it to Brandon. He just smiled and said he had never seen it before, and they of course believed him. I told them that my door had been locked, so he must have picked it, but they told me that was nonsense. I felt so alone. I had no one. I didn't know what to do. For better or worse, a decision was made for me. The next morning, Mrs. Joseph called me to the living room and said I had stolen her jewelry. I was completely confused until she held up a pearl necklace I had never seen before. She told me she had found it in my purse, which she was holding in her other hand. I begged her to believe me, that I hadn't stolen it, but there was nothing I could say to convince her. Brandon stood in the hallway smiling to himself. I knew it was him. They fired me on the spot. I flew back to France the next day. I couldn't believe how easily Brandon had destroyed my life. For months afterwards, I was extremely depressed. I thought I had blown my one chance at living in the US and feared I wouldn't get another one. Fortunately, I found my way back to the States several years later and still live here. I have a good job and good friends. I still think about Brandon from time to time. I can only imagine the evil person he's grown up to become. For most people, traveling alone is terrifying, and understandably so. For some reason, it's never bothered me all that much. I've always been quite independent and outgoing, so befriending new people comes naturally to me. It's probably one of the reasons I decided to become an au pair. Also, I've always wanted to become a child psychologist. In my opinion, one of the world's problems could be solved if children had better parenting and proper guidance. Beyond that, I've always wanted to experience America, so working as an au pair was something I seriously considered. I'm originally from Germany, from a tiny village outside Cologne. Most Americans have never heard of it, so when people ask where I'm from, I usually just say Germany. It's easier that way. Before you say anything, I believe that my English is rather good, or so I'm told. It's gotten considerably better since living in the US, and people are often impressed by it. My father is originally from the UK and did everything in his power to ensure that my English was as good as my German, if not better. I'm not sure if they have them here in the US, but I had an electronic dictionary growing up that doubled as a translator. I remember messing around with it a ton as a kid, plugging in words and translating them with my dad. I also read like crazy when I was younger, which I think definitely helped me. Anyway, my host family lives in a wealthy suburb in Northern California. Their house is unbelievable. You might think living here would be lonely, but the agency does a great job of connecting nearby au pairs, so I immediately clicked with a few girls in the surrounding neighborhoods. My best friend here is an American girl named Jennifer. She's great. She's like me, but a little louder and a little taller. We've been inseparable since we met. We're both here for the same reasons, working, exploring, and trying to make the most of our time abroad. There's a huge college campus nearby, and it's pretty much the only decent place to go out that isn't $100 Uber away. Both the frat and bar scenes there are pretty good, so that's where we spend most of our weekends. I think a lot of the guys are naturally drawn to us because of our accents, and the international card gets us pretty far. It's supposedly difficult to get into frat parties without being in a sorority here, but we don't have much of an issue. The bars here are a lot more fun though. Our favorite spot is this bar called Tap. I've noticed Americans love giving their nights themes. Taco Tuesday, Wine Wednesday. I guess any excuse to drink on a weekday, you know? It's kind of funny. Tuesdays are the most enjoyable nights of the week for Jenny and I. This story takes place on one of those nights. About a few months after I arrived to the US, I was standing by the bar, waiting on drinks for Jenny and I, when this tall guy with curly brown hair approached me and said, "You're German, right?" That kind of threw me off. People almost never guess I'm German. European, sure, but not German specifically. I don't really have distinctive German features, so anytime anyone's able to guess my nationality, it fascinates me. I laughed and told him he was right, and he introduced himself as Sebi with a confident smile. We talked for a while, and everything was very natural. I'll admit, I get approached a lot when I go out. I'm in shape, and I know I'm decent looking, but guys are usually kind of obvious and cheesy when they talk to me. Sebi felt different. The more we talked, the more it seemed like he was actually interested in me as a person as opposed to just hitting on me. He knew a lot of tidbits about German culture, which was something I quite liked about him. A lot of the Americans I don't talk to don't know much about the rest of the world, so it was nice to talk to someone well-traveled, smart, and cultured. We talked and laughed for a while longer before I introduced him to Jenny. He smiled and waved his friend over, an Asian guy who introduced himself as Hunter. He and Jenny immediately hit it off. All in all, it was a great time. Before the night ended, Sebi asked me for my number, and I gave it to him without hesitation. A few days later, Sebi invited me over for dinner. When I got to his place, I expected him to have dinner reservations ready or something, but instead, he was cooking a pasta dish for us in the kitchen. It was quite sweet. I ended up helping him prepare the meal, and he opened a bottle of wine for us. I had such a great time that I ended up sleeping over at his apartment. The next morning, I woke up and examined his room a little. Unlike most college apartments, it was quite clean. He didn't have any posters or typical decorations up, but rather a bunch of landscape pictures. His walls were covered with dozens of square photographs, all black and white. Castles, cities, countryside views, they all looked oddly familiar. I got up and looked at them a little more closely, realizing they all had locations printed on them. They were all from Germany, every single one with the exception of a picture of Monte Carlo, Monaco. Sebi had woken up by then, so I turned and asked him jokingly if he had a thing for German architecture. He laughed and told me about his dad's aerial photo collection, which he had picked some of his favorites from. I walked back towards his bed and realized there were some more pictures above his bed. My jaw literally dropped when I saw that one of the pictures was a landscape of my village, taken from above. The picture was like 20 minutes from my house. I told him this, and he got rather excited, telling me what a crazy coincidence that was. I was amazed. The odds of that were so slim. He then asked me a bunch of questions about my hometown, which I was happy to answer. Over the next few weeks, Sebi and I spent a lot of time together. I was working and he had class during the week, but we spent every weekend going out together, plus Tuesdays. Everything was great. He was a sweet guy and made sure I was comfortable and enjoying myself when we went out. He was also quite nice to my friends, which I appreciated. His friend Hunter turned out to be a little weird though. Every time someone would play Take It Off by Fisher, he would quite literally start stripping in front of Jenny. One night, Sebi got rather drunk, significantly drunker than usual. As he was walking me to his apartment, he was going on and on about how much he loved German women and how he always wanted a German wife. At one point, he said he always wanted to marry an au pair because foreign girls are great with kids. I brushed it off as some weird fantasy, but that was the first thing he did or said that didn't sit well with me. Obviously not a deal breaker though, he had been perfect up until then. But then came the first time he took me out to dinner. He took me to this Italian spot and told me he'd picked it because they had plenty of vegetarian options, which was sweet, but I never told him I was vegetarian. I gave him a little smile and playfully asked him how he knew I was vegetarian, and he told me he saw it in one of my Insta posts. That eased me for the rest of the dinner, but later when I was back home, I realized my only post mentioning it was from years ago, and I post a lot, so you'd have to scroll pretty far to get there, let alone pick up on the caption I had used. And that's not even mentioning the fact that all my posts are from a long time ago in Germany. The next time I stayed over, while Sebi was asleep, I unlocked his phone. I remembered his password, he hadn't exactly been careful about hiding it. What I found in there was sickening. There was a folder in his camera roll titled Wife, which contained screenshots of my social media dating back months. Posts, captions, tagged locations, even screenshots of old stories I didn't even remember posting. His notes app was even worse. There were English translations of my old posts in there, plus a rough schedule of when and where I'd go out based on my Instagram story posts. There was information in there about my hometown, about Germany, about things I liked, all based on my Instagram if you could believe it. But the worst thing I found in his phone was a photo of my driver's license. Everything hit me at once. The second night I had gone out in America, I had lost my wallet at a frat party which had my ID in it. That's how he found my Instagram. That's how he knew everything. Where I was from, what I liked, my birthday. None of it was chance. He had planned all of it. There was a long graphic message that went into disgusting detail about what he wanted to do to me, which I don't want to talk about. I didn't know who the guy in those messages was. I couldn't stand to look at everything anymore. So I grabbed my stuff and slipped out of his apartment without making a sound. Regrettably, I didn't take any photos for evidence. The whole drive back to my host family's house, my hands were shaking. Germans take privacy seriously. I felt sick. My au pair profile was private, but my ID? He had my full name, and with that, I knew he could have found anything. I didn't sleep that night. I prayed that he hadn't been able to figure out my host family's address. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. They were all from Sebi, asking me where I went, why I left, if I went through his phone. I sent him one final message, telling him that if he ever tried to contact me again, I'd call the police. Then I blocked him on everything. For the next few days, I lived in perpetual fear, worrying that he'd show up at any moment. I privated my Instagram, locked everything down, and created a close friends story for when I went out, just in case he tried to find me again. Thankfully, he hasn't shown up yet, and it's been about 3 months since I last heard from him. Still though, I can't help but feeling this pit in my stomach that he knows my host family's address, and that he's planning something. I hope I never see him again, but I'll update if something else happens. Update. I hoped I wouldn't have to do this, but the past few weeks, I noticed the same silver car driving up and down my host family's street, sometimes just sitting across the street from their house. He's also tried to reach out to me through fake phone numbers and Instagram accounts, all within the same time frame. The messages always just ask me to talk, but I haven't responded to any of them. All of this gives me reason to believe he knows where I'm living, and that I'm potentially in danger. I'm building a case to present to the police, but I've heard that they don't take this kind of thing very seriously. Luckily, my au pair commitment ends soon, so I'll be back in Germany soon enough. This happened a few years ago. I've always wanted to live in Europe, ever since I was a kid. It was my lifelong dream. More than anything though, I wanted to work with kids. I've always had a way with them, and I knew ever since I was little that I wouldn't be fully content with my life if my job didn't involve caring for or teaching kids in some capacity. So when I found out I could become an au pair in France, where I could use my French from high school and be part of a family, it felt like everything was falling into place. The decision wasn't easy. I'm from Canada, and the move was a big one, but France had favorable visa options for Canadians, and it was the perfect chance to improve my French, Canada's second language. Plus, I had a few friends in Paris, so I wouldn't be entirely alone there. Money, though, was a problem. I didn't have family support. I won't get into why, that's personal, but let's just say I was on my own. I couldn't afford one of those expensive agencies, so I used a free au pair website instead. Not ideal, but it was all I could manage. That's how I connected with Leah. Leah's ad was warm and straightforward. She needed help with her 2 kids while her husband traveled for work. She seemed wonderful, very polite and very friendly. On our video calls, she was quick to call me chérie and ma belle, which felt different from home, but in a charming, motherly way. She asked a lot about me, how I was with kids, how I felt about family life, but didn't talk much about herself. Still, she felt genuine. I trusted her. The only thing that felt off was the kids. I asked to meet them on our calls more than once. Leah always had a reason why they couldn't join. One was napping, the other was at school, or they were on a playdate with a friend. She promised I'd meet them the second I arrived. It felt a little strange, but I figured I'd see them soon enough. Leah sent me a formal agreement. Everything looked proper, and we agreed on my start date. I booked my flight, packed my life into a suitcase, and said goodbye to Canada. When I landed at Charles de Gaulle, Leah wasn't there. That surprised me. From everything I had heard, most host families meet their au pairs at the airport. But then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Leah, telling me that she was stuck in traffic and instructing me to go to the side drop-off area where she'd have me picked up. I remember using Google Translate on her message because it sounded like she was going to have someone else pick me up, and I wanted to double check. I was right, and that made me confused and a little unsettled. Despite that, I followed her instructions. A few minutes later, a car drove up and a woman approached, late 40s maybe, with short blonde hair and a bright smile. She looked nothing like Leah. She introduced herself as Leah's cousin and said, "You must be Leah's au pair. She sent me to get you." I hesitated. Something felt off immediately. I asked her if I could talk to Leah and unlocked my phone. She told me that Leah was probably still driving and assured me that she'd be waiting for me at home. I called Leah anyway, and it went straight to voicemail. It didn't even ring. The woman kept telling me that I'd be fine with a huge smile on her face. I was confused, but also exhausted from the flight. And what was I supposed to do? Stand there in the airport forever? So I did what she said and got in the car. The woman kept the conversation going non-stop as we drove. She asked about my flight, my life in Canada, and if I was excited to start my new job. But when I tried to steer the conversation back to Leah or the children, she brushed it off. Just said that I'd love them and that I'd see them soon. I started to feel worse and worse about the whole situation. She was too polished, too eager to keep me talking without actually answering anything. The scenery outside began to change. I had the address in Google Maps, and the route we were taking didn't match. We were heading away from the suburbs and into what looked like an industrial-type area. I started panicking. I felt like I was in the process of being abducted. I asked her directly where we were going, and she responded lightly, calling it a shortcut, again repeating that Leah was expecting us. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew at that point that she was lying. I told her to take me back to the airport, but she didn't answer. I told her I'd call the police if she didn't take me back to the airport, and she told me to relax. But I wasn't letting up. No matter what I said, she just kept repeating herself about Leah and insisted that I was overreacting. The next time the car slowed down, I kicked the door open and jumped out onto the street. The woman didn't drive off. Instead, she kind of just looked at me like I was the one who was acting crazy. I called my mom, who told me to get away from the car, get somewhere safe, and call for help. As I was talking to my mom, I looked through the windshield and noticed the woman now on her phone, speaking rapidly in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't French, and it definitely wasn't English. I couldn't shake the gut feeling that she was talking to Leah. There wasn't another car in sight, but under no circumstance was I getting back in that vehicle. Eventually, the driver's side door opened, and the woman took a step towards me. I screamed that I was on the phone with the police, and that actually got her to stop. Without saying another word, she went back to the car, threw my suitcase onto the road, and then sped off. I got the license plate as she drove away, but I was on the verge of tears with my mom still on the phone. I ended up hitchhiking to one of my friends' houses. I honestly don't know what I would have done without that option. My friend's family helped me report everything to the police, and eventually even agreed to help me with the fare back to Canada, which I was beyond grateful for. Eventually, they updated me on what the police informed them. Apparently, there was no registered au pair family by Leah's name. The number Leah used was prepaid and untraceable. All the photos of the children were taken from the internet. Everyone I talked to about this tells me the same thing. I was moments away from being trafficked. The worst part about that whole thing was that I wasted all that money on those plane tickets and traumatized myself permanently. Looking back, I know how lucky I am. I was moments away from something terrible, something I can barely let myself imagine. The whole situation was calculated from start to finish, and if I hadn't trusted my gut, I might not be here to tell the story. It took some time, but I eventually made my way back to France, this time through a verified agency. I'm hoping to eventually fulfill residency requirements and become a permanent citizen here.